The huge glass building went high into the vastness of the sky. The boy put his hand to the glass and looked at everything that was going on in astonishment. This was not his world. He found himself in a virtual world in which magic, science, and supernatural powers were mixed. He's inside the end of the world game, and this is the place, the start of this game. He'd been here for about a week. The guy clutched his head. He seemed to be stuck here. His name was Lee Han-sung, and you're asking how he knows so much about this place. Because he has a lot of experience in live broadcasting. He's also been through the entire game. As far as he could remember, drastic events were about to happen in the future. Within a year, a wave of monsters will come. Within 3 years, a revolution must take place. Within years, a world war that will shatter the world's foundations. At one time, he even competed in the only one best users competition as a ranked player. However, it's not like that now. His starting characteristics are too low. He'll be able to hold out for a while, but he won't survive the revolution and the world war. The guy shuddered. What if death in this world means death in reality? He sat on his bed and pondered, a little creepy at heart. Was there any way I could make my stay here easier? I didn't want to die at all. Suddenly, he heard a buzzing sound right above his ear. It was a drone for filming, a regular quadcopter with a camera on the front. Suddenly, the boy had a great idea. He's got video game footage from the past. His connection to reality is severed, but he can look at footage from the past. He logged into his account and started looking at long-ago footage. He needed to use it to survive. In addition, this drone could be used to gather the necessary information. Han-sung clenched his fist. He seemed to have a chance. All that was left was to figure out what his characteristics would be. The boy picked up 3 dice and threw them on the floor. The cubes fell to the floor with a clatter and clattered. He began to study his characteristics. Judging from his past experience, luck points are very important. Then we'll have to roll the die until the luck points come out. There's no other choice. He threw the dice over and over. They clattered on the concrete floor. Each time, he failed. And this time, too. There was no end to it. Every time some bullshit fell out. Suddenly, however, the guy saw something, and his eyes widened with surprise. His luck was at level 99. The rest of his characteristics left a lot to be desired, but that didn't matter anymore. The guy scratched his head and started laughing hysterically. Finally, after so many attempts, he succeeded. He spread his arms out and laughed out loud. Joy glistened on his face. Luck points. This time it had worked out. He would be able to start studying. His bracelet asked if he wanted to start training. The boy immediately pressed yes. Still, I should have thought about it. Maybe I should check my luck. The guy opened the inventory. At the very beginning, you are given a standard inventory worth 1,000,001. A random set to get a unique skill, a special skill and property to try your luck, is worth opening the random chest. Everything around him lit up. It seemed his luck hadn't failed him. The boy smiled. He waved his hand, his body overwhelmed by various emotions. He stood up like an old anime character and leaned his hand on his head. Luck had just struck. The drone just circled around him, filming every moment. He was like an annoying fly. At this point, Han-sung thought it would be a good idea to put some special effects on here, and it would make a good YouTube video. He waved his hand and beckoned to the quadricopter. Well, he had good luck. Everything works just fine. The guy was in good spirits. It was time to try his luck in the real world. He came to the Korean Hero Academy. In this place, heroes from all over the world, from every corner of the planet, have gathered. Han-sung stood on the doorstep, a little nervous. He had a long and thorny path to travel. He tried to cheer himself up a little. It was definitely worth trying his hand at a place like this. The boy walked inside the academy where it was quite noisy. Now, with that score, he would lose to anyone, and that was a problem. He went into the waiting room. He'd have to be careful not to be expelled as soon as he was admitted. The guy walked into the room, which was pretty crowded. There were a lot of freshmen this year. With his eyes, he began to look for an empty seat to sit down. It was worth checking out the heroes here, as there were many important characters at the academy. You'd need to get a couple of trustworthy friends to survive in this place. Never too many. He sat down at the nearest desk. There was only one thing going through his mind: survival. Something. Suddenly he felt sad. He even mentally cried. He felt sorry for himself. But why should he worry about that? Suddenly, a stern voice was heard. The boy came out of his musings. There was a man standing in front of them, apparently the one who would be enrolling them. He welcomed all the heroes to the academy. The man said in a loud voice that he was going to give the exam instructions now. Hansun felt uneasy again. This place made him feel a little depressed. The man who came had a bright smile on his face. His name is Han Do-seok, and he is a C-ranked hero. Inside himself, the boy cried, may he never in his life compare with one like him. Han continued to explain. He pointed his hand at the board and said that this is why they don't just represent their country, they defend their land from monster attacks. Han Song sat there bored. The speech was a little long, and it was getting more and more boring. This man was giving a lecture and at the same time telling them about the structure of the world. Is that really necessary? Han Dong-seok was enthusiastic, and all throughout the story with a smile on his face. When you hear for the first time, it's interesting, but for an experienced player like Han Sung, it's just useless. The man finally finished his lecture and clapped his hands loudly. Still smiling, he said that now the entrants must go to the field for the practical exam. He hoped that everyone would pass, and they would see them again. Han Song walked out of the classroom. He still couldn't believe it was finally over. They were approaching the exit, where the sun was shining brightly, so brightly that one could be blinded. The entrance exam for the Korean Hero Academy had begun. The boys walked out onto the spacious field where 3 portals stood. An admission and a bright debut, it was impossible to screw up. The kid even cheered up a little, and a smile appeared on his face. After all, after the lecture, it was nice to unwind. He started looking around to get a better look at the people involved. It was quite crowded. The guy turned his head around and saw that there was a weapon on one rack. There was a sword, a shield, a sledgehammer, and everything. I had to be serious about choosing a weapon. It's what he's going to become. If he chooses a sword, he will become a swordsman. If he chooses a bow, he will become an archer. The primary weapon determines the direction of growth. Last year, when he was a player, he chose a staff, and his main power was magic. But this time, the boy decided to choose a sword. He took the blade and began to examine it. But besides that, he would have 2 more weapons. He raised his hand and created a sort of magic circle. With his luck, he would be able to make up for his lack of sword skills. However, for now, these were just his plans. He did not fully understand whether it would turn out to be a venture or not. The announcer announced that the exam was about to begin, and the boy moved closer to the portal. He felt a little creepy. The exam began. Immediately, various monsters pounced on the boy. He fought several goblins that were of low rank. This exam is graded by the number of monsters killed and time spent. F-ranked monsters are fine, but E-ranked monsters are harder to deal with. How do you deal with them? Suddenly, Lee saw one of the goblins attacking him from the back. The boy put his sword out and blocked the goblin's blow. It wasn't that strong. You can't get very far on his performance, which depends only on luck. However, there are a lot of tools here, right? The boy took a small orange potion out of his pocket. If you use this, you might get something. He crushed the can. The goblin looked on in horror as his opponent transformed. Levels. Muscular strength levels are temporarily increasing. Indeed, the boy felt an unprecedented surge of strength. He chopped the goblin's club in one fell swoop. He handled those 2 easily, but no one knows what will happen next. Before the exam, it's a world where luck rules. A place where despair turns to joy and vice versa, the casino of the underworld. A courteous concierge greeted new visitors. Han Sung looked around. We need to check if the hidden fragment is all right. Make some money and buy the necessary equipment. There was noise everywhere. The guy turned his head. What was even going on in there? One of the men, who apparently lost a large sum of money, almost cried, "Number, what are you doing?" He was holding a chip that he'd bet a lot of money on. This is the hidden fragment, and he had a small bracelet in his hand. The boy looks closely. There's no doubt it's Bake Raymond, the one he wanted. He, who was part gambler, had a barbarian bracelet. That's a pretty important item. When aptitudes are not strongly developed, a person becomes a loser. The bald man was literally crying because he had lost so much money. The boy made a decision to come here when he analyzed how he could still win better at slot machines. Today, I had to find out if he could buy good luck items. That was the most important thing. He pulled the lever and flipped a coin. The slot machine started spinning. Literally a few seconds later, it hit 3 sevens, the jackpot, just like that. Chips sprinkled into the box, or was it some kind of coins, in a word the guy won? Luck works. The boy smiled broadly. It wasn't for nothing he had tried after all. He assumed the pathos pose again and began to feel proud of himself. This is how he was able to buy the items he needed to pass the exam. He clenched his hand and used a low-level speed potion, increasing speed. Thus, he could easily deal with low-level monsters. Goblins no longer posed any danger. They were just flying around like they were toys. Thanks to the items he bought with the money he won, the guy was able to deal with rank E monsters, but he spent everything he had. Before he could rest properly, there was a voice saying that a rank D monster was being summoned, so he had to get ready. Han Sung-hee almost swallowed his tongue. He had just dealt with the others, and there was a monster of such a high rank. Through the light, a dark shred of what looked like some kind of rag began to show. It was the ghost, the one the crystal had summoned. He looked like a mask with glowing eyes. What the hell is this? The guy grabbed his sword. So how could a ghost monster with only magic, regardless of physical skills, appear on the exam? Han Song was a little confused, but there was nothing to do. However, it was sheer luck that there was a monster that was so suited to his abilities. The boy swung his sword and ran straight at the monster. His sword glowed with a blue light. If this monster was only affected by magic, there was nothing to do. You need to use your magical superiority ability. He swung his sword and it hit the monster. The ghost didn't expect this and started to fly apart. It's working great. The guy stretched out in a smile. However, it was a bit early to rejoice. The ghost began to regenerate and conversely strengthened. His body stretched and turned into tentacles. One of them flew within a few centimeters of the boy's face. Thank God he had time to put his sword out. The weapon continued to glow with a bluish light, and now it was necessary to finish this thing off. The guy swung his sword, and bright blue lights flashed around him. Dealing with this ghost was a bit difficult. There was no choice anyway, so stop whining. Finally, the boy made it. With one powerful blow, he chopped the ghost in half. Han Song was breathing heavily. This kind of trial was the first time, so he had used up almost all of his strength. He sank heavily to one knee for some respite. The poor guy tried to regain his breath after such a battle. He was just fine for me, but still, a monster of such a high rank. There was almost no magic power left, and as luck would have it, the announcer announced that a C-rank monster was being summoned. Okay, I'll have to hold out as long as I can, the boy thought. A bright blue light flashed. The monster was summoned, from where only a roar could be heard. What the guy saw sent shivers down his spine, but that's just mockery. The monster showed himself into the light. It was clear from his gait that it wasn't going to be easy. At this point, the guy realized that there would be no more favorable moments for him like last time, so he had to improvise. A true monster stood before him. A two-headed troll with a horn on each head and a weighty club in its hands. Han Song standing in front of the monster, he tried to come to his senses. He had spent all the items on magic power, and it was making things more difficult. You have to act with what you have. Beating with his last strength, he gripped his sword tighter. The monster stood right in front of him, its eyes glowing red with rage. You couldn't take down a monster that big. Some people had already finished their exam and were beginning to exit their portals. Almost everyone is out now, and teens are starting to look at the screens. Are there still some left unreleased? Someone's out. A whisper ran through the rows of students. The one who came out must have been very unhappy with his result. It was a girl, her face clearly displeased. And from the portal, a girl who scored points appeared. Her name was Song Si-yeon, and she was angry. This girl specialized in stealth attack and also shadow movement, standing at the 9th place of the elite specialized hero schools. The girl hummed. People began to whisper. She was in 9th place after all. With such progress, she could have easily moved up already. Shi-young turned her head to the table of the remaining contestants to see who was still left. There were 4 people left. The girl raised her eyebrows in surprise. Lee Han-sung. He was at the very end, but who was he? The girl resolutely couldn't understand where this guy came from. The rest of the exam participants also started whispering. Everyone here was quite famous, but this guy was unknown. Finally, another exam participant started to come out. Everyone turned to look at the portal. A kid about their age came out of there. He had a tired smile on his face, laughed, and said that the exam was harder than he expected. Jin Hong, points. Everyone immediately started whispering among themselves. It was said that he had risen quickly due to his physical strength indicators. Then another participant appeared from the portal. It was another guy, and everyone immediately turned their gazes to him. His name was Gil Sung-hyun, points. The boy looked at the leaderboard and grimaced in displeasure. Apparently, he wasn't very satisfied with his result. He tossed his wand to the floor, which bounced onward with a clatter. Other people decided not to get close to him because there's no telling what to expect. He was there longer and got fewer points. Weird. Keel looked at the chart. Who the hell is Lee Han-sung? Some unknown guy still there? The other participants also froze in anticipation. There were only 2 people left. Would they really reach the very last monster? Another member appeared from the portal. He began to slowly walk out. Everyone gasped and held their breath. No one had expected someone to hold it that long. Another guy with a calm expression appeared from the portal. It was Han Bayul. Why are they all making such a fuss? He got a score of... The boy stood up and looked around at everyone with a surprised look. He thought he'd done well, but there was someone else. Then everyone finally fell silent and started watching the last contestant. A friend ran up to Han Bayul and gave him a hug. He's in first place. But the guy stopped him and said there was another competitor. Hong, surprised, looked at the leaderboard and nodded his head. That's true. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I should have called the professor to look into it. But it can't be. However, it turns out it can. The silhouette of the last participant began to emerge from the portal. Everyone froze in anticipation. It showed at first a leg that was shaking from overexertion. Han-sung finally came out of the portal. The guy was apparently very tired. His face was filled with excitement as he scored points and was in first place. As soon as the others saw his result, they sighed noisily. No way. Shi-young was horrified. She just couldn't believe her eyes. Who is this guy anyway? Han-sung walked by and began to look around at all the participants. No one could even say a word. Everyone was shocked by this result. The guys began to part, and bit by bit surrounded the newcomer, who happened to be in first place. Han-sung. Song seemed to not pay any attention to them. He simply stalked towards the exit. The others just stared at his footprints in surprise and fear without deciding to say a word. Everyone was shocked by this result. Soon, the guy disappeared somewhere in the darkness of the tunnel. The guys stood there. After a second, there was screaming. Did you see that? He looked down and walked away. No one could believe it. He looks tough, but he's ugly in the face. The guys started whispering amongst themselves. The day was coming to an end. Our hero decided to go home to get some rest. He was so tired that he didn't even have the strength to speak each time he heard the others whispering behind his back. He heard everyone else talking about him with contempt, as if he were mocking everyone else. When has he ever mocked anyone? Yesterday when he came out of the portal, he was barely on his feet. He still had that battle in front of him. While the trolls' heads were fighting each other, he had earned points from his survival time. He was just lucky. Even now, he was creeped out by the realization. He had certainly used his luck to come up with a battle strategy, but still. Behind his back, the whispering continued. The others were talking about how ugly he was. He can't even look at him for 3 seconds. The guy remembered that he only had 3 points of charm. He looked at himself in the mirror, but no matter how low the numbers were, they were overkill. There he goes, raising his level of attractiveness. He thought that sometimes it was a good idea to focus on attractiveness rather than fleeting good fortune. It's a good thing the reward comes after the mission is over. He opened the control panel. He got points for popularity and other awards as well. Not a bad start, but luck is working as it should. The farther he goes, the more important the achievements gained during the trials will be. Achievement in this place means more than just strength. We should raise the points. To be more effective, why don't we try our luck again by opening the tuition reward? Still, he decided to open the next chest to see what the reward would be. After each challenge, a certain reward is given. He was rewarded with a barbarian sword, quite rare. Now that's interesting. The tutorial just ended, and he's already got a rare level. We'll need to check out the effects of the whole set, except I need to find them. I knew it. Together, they're more effective. Now, with the bracelet, he'll be able to raise his numbers. Han-sung walked up to his room, but finally home. Now, it would be okay to rest. The boy went into his room and saw a rather spacious room with a large window facing the street. That size even made him a little dizzy. For a few minutes, he was still standing there, dizzy. The boy sighed. Well, it's just as he thought. The rooms here are too big. He pondered for a moment. Alone in here would be quite spacious. Also, the air is clean and cool. In principle, if not picky, it is comfortable here. He stood in the middle of the empty room and continued to ponder aloud. The fact that he was stuck in this game and the spacious room, the feeling of emptiness and loneliness was weighing on him a bit. Puffing could be heard in the gymnasium. Someone was working hard. A heavy barbell with a few pancakes was surging upward like it was some kind of toy. She was lying on the shoulders of the guy who was squatting with her. He was trying his best. It was Hong. He was practicing hard to increase his muscle strength. This newcomer was giving him a hard time. Suddenly, another silhouette approached him. It was Han Buell. He looked at his comrade with a cold gaze. The guy handed him a bottle of fresh water. He looked at it with tired eyes. The guy asked him what he was getting so worked up about. From this angle, it was obvious how much bigger Hong was than his comrade. He thanked him and took the bottle. Buell asked who the newcomer was. As soon as Hong heard his name, he immediately became angry. Didn't he see the look in his eyes? Buell began to remember the look. He seemed to look exhausted. The boy hesitated. He didn't even know what to answer. He didn't really care. Hong suddenly cheered up and said he thought he saw his brother in him. No, his father. Buell wondered, what the hell is this nonsense? The boy began to drink water greedily from the bottle. He drank it in just a few gulps and clutched the bottle in his hands with a crunch. He seemed cheered up. Just what was affecting his mood? That's it? That's it? It was like he was saying, try again if you can. He squeezed the bottle harder and harder. No, that's right. He was expressing calmness. And his friend wondered, calm? Hong seemed to be enthusiastic. He kept gibbering. Buell asked, since when did Gil become his friend? Hoon replied that anyone his age is his friend. This guy seems like a pretty good kid. He clapped his hands and went to the barbell again. Anyway, he's going for another workout in the gravity chamber. Bull was horrified by this. What? He'd already spent 4 hours in there. However, the guy didn't even seem to be paying attention. He clenched his fist and ran over there in full confidence. His enthusiasm was enviable. He said that if he practiced hard, only then he could win. Bayo looked at him and smiled slightly. This guy is funny. He decided to go and practice his supernatural powers too. Hong waved at him and said that they would see each other later. Boel went to the exit of the gym. Heavy sighs could be heard there again. As soon as he left the gym, he immediately activated his communication bracelet. He got far enough away so he couldn't be heard and made a phone call. He went to his supervisor and said he needed to check on someone. He spoke in a whisper and said he just had to check the data, and then he'd take it from there. Whether he can make friends with this unknown guy, who knows what's on his mind. He asked his boss for a favor. The guy thinks about it, and he thinks it would be nice if this guy wasn't what he thinks he is. He doesn't want to kill him himself. The next day, all the students returned to their classrooms. It was time for the next lecture. As soon as Han Song walked into the classroom, then everyone started whispering. The boy could hear their conversations perfectly. Does whoever is in the H spot get that much attention? Han Song walked around the classroom and looked around nervously. He felt terribly embarrassed. His drone was flying next to him. It was only visible to the players, so he could hear all the whispering that was going on in the classroom. It made him stop even more awkwardly. Thanks to this little quadricopter, he is now popular and will earn more points. Need more points, and he can buy the random chest. The boy shook his head. No, attracting attention wasn't the best option right now. He'd do it when he had enough physical strength points. He sat down at his desk. People were still whispering, and it was starting to get a little annoying. How many weird things had they made up about him? The guy folded his hands in front of him and began to think. Among all these people, there was a hero who would later make some noise on the mainland. We need to befriend him, and he couldn't ignore him. Soon, the teacher entered the classroom. She approached the students with a light gait. The girls who were sitting behind him started to overshop. Is this the first time they've ever seen a teacher? It was a woman, quite young and beautiful. She smiled and greeted the students. She kept smiling and looked friendly. The woman introduced herself and said her name was Lee Jong-hyun, and she was a magician. The guys started to recall, her main power is fire magic. Not only does she have outstanding abilities, but her appearance is also, it's quite a famous person. Among the teachers, there is also a hidden fragment. We need to get to know her better. A woman stood in the middle and waved her hand. The lecture began. She started drawing something on the blackboard and explaining complicated formulas. It was quite difficult for the students to understand all these materials because it was the first time they were faced with such an influx of information. Hong sat at his desk, scratching the back of his head nervously. He didn't understand anything. Lectures on magic too complicated. Boel, sitting next to him, held a finger up and told him to think a little easier. It would be easier for him if he imagined it was a jigsaw puzzle. Hong listened to his comrade and began to think hard. It seems that steam is about to come out of his ears. Han Sung was watching all this. Bayul must know all of this because he's from the Mage clan. Hoon's specialty is that he's very strong, but he seems to be zero in magic. The boy suddenly wondered how much he had grown. I had to check his vitals. Ability scores are above normal. What he saw made the boy think for a moment. He was growing much faster than he had expected. Then he looked at Hong's characteristics and was also quite surprised. Even without cool and unique skills, he was quite strong. After all, the main characters are different in level. The boy continued to ponder, and quite distracted from the lecture. He began to look around at the students, and another girl with bright yellow hair caught his eye, Ian Charles. She listened attentively to the lecture, one of the episodic characters whose existence isn't mentioned until the second half of the game. Most users don't pay any attention to her at all. One day, one player didn't think of skimming content, bringing up an episodic character, giving her treasure rank items and all sorts of potions. Unlike other characters, she began to develop very quickly. But he doesn't need such rapid growth. After all, he has the ability to view information and the skill. He started looking through her characterization window. He knew there was something about this girl, especially that special skill mistress of God's punishment. Wait, she's a real hero. The guy even felt a little sick at the thought. A not-so-favorable image of the infernal world suddenly popped into his mind. There were huge monsters. The huge, tall demons with horns on their heads looked up with their blazing red eyes. Suddenly, it was as if another star was lit up in the sky. It was so bright that it could blind one. Then, this star fell to Earth with a huge explosion, scattering Earth all around. That was the girl. The name of the skill speaks for itself. She was like an angel. From her came an incredibly bright light. She had a long staff in her hands. Thanks to her, the world became brighter, and demons and monsters turned into ashes. However, she lacks the basics to reach that level by herself, so she needs help. Han-sung will help her get closer to passing the game and raise his survival percentage. He shifted his gaze to the girl. However, in order to get closer to her, he would need to befriend her first. He thought about it and realized that this task would not be as easy as it seemed at first glance. First, he needs to increase his charm percentage. Right. Then why are we sitting here? This is the critical moment. Jong-hyun continued talking about magic formulas, turning back and forth to the formula board. Finally, she stopped her lecture and said they'd better continue after the break. Students began to speak, rise from their seats, and rest. Charles, too, rose from her seat and went for a walk. Our hero sat and did not move from his seat. He started to watch the girl over his shoulder. You can't just run up to her. She might think it's some kind of maniac. The girl went to the soda machine to get a cool drink. Maybe there's a smartwatch to pay for it? She looked at her gadget. However, all she saw was a traitorous dark display. Looks like the battery's dead. I started frantically searching my pockets for change, but there didn't seem to be any. Suddenly, there was a beeping sound, and the drink was paid for. The girl raised her head and looked forward in surprise. Han-sung looked at her with a friendly look and held out his hand. Looks like she can't pay. Then let her choose her drink. Charlie, incredibly embarrassed, and started twirling her head in different directions. She looked at our hero with a surprised and, in the same way, frightened look. What kind of reaction is that? Han-sung calmly asked, "And what does he know?" The girl nodded her head in agreement. She said that there was not a person among the freshmen who did not know him. She seemed to say it with great enthusiasm. He caught a bottle of soda and asked, "Is this true? Why would it be?" Then the guy pointed to the machine and said, "Let her choose," before he changed his mind. Charles immediately waved his hands and protested, "No, she might not drink." Suddenly, however, her finger touched the price tag of one of the drinks. There was a click and also the rattle of a metal can. The girl looked away, frightened. She immediately became embarrassed again and fearfully apologized. She was an accident. Han-sung took out a bottle and handed it to the girl. So she says, "Thank you." The poor girl immediately blushed and thanked the guy. She was so embarrassed that she was ready to fall under the ground. Han-sung waved goodbye to her and said he had to go. Now they would know each other. She lowered her head in acknowledgement and looked down at her feet. She didn't dare say a word. Han-sung was minding his own business and thinking. She seemed to be easily caught off guard. Did he think that was enough for the first time? He scratched the back of his head here. There's no special influence on the level of attraction right now anyway. You have to adjust to her character. Soon, the break ended and the lecture continued. Jong-hyun continued to explain the basic theory for mastering magical transformation. Han-sung Taesong tried his best to stay awake. He really didn't want to sit here. There was nothing for him to do in basic classes. First, he had to create 2 magical threads on his fingers. He did it easily. Then merge them into one. This guy did it with ease too. Then make two threads again and merge into one. It seemed like some kind of game to him. And then repeat tens and hundreds of times to get a thread of compressed magical power. Due to their too low magic stats and control levels, it doesn't do a particularly good job of combining them. If you tie several thousands or tens of thousands of such threads, you can create a magic circle or a magic field, then get hidden fragment passive skill, although it wouldn't be easy to achieve. Every time he tied a string, his magic power increased by 1 point. Perhaps he could do it in a week or two. Suddenly, the teacher stopped her lecture and looked at the boy. The woman addressed him by name in a calm voice. The boy immediately stopped and looked at her fearfully. The woman stared at him and said that she didn't think the guy was really listening to the lecture right now. Han Sung was even more frightened. Then the worst happened. She called him to the board to ask a question. Pointing to the formula, she said that this formula is for creating light and fireballs. If they heard her explanation, the guy would be able to explain and deduce the formula for transforming manifested magic power. She explained about half of it, but it was okay if he got it a little wrong. Han Song stood up from his seat. The guy was incredibly excited. Well, there he was. Half an explanation? What nonsense. The guy moved towards the blackboard, incredibly slow and paced. He didn't want to embarrass himself right now. The teacher probably wanted to explain to everyone what would happen if they didn't listen to her. The woman held out a pencil to him. Is it worth showing your strength? The boy thought about it and began to recall formulas from his past experiences. Use magic to summon a ball of light, then cancel its use, and then summon the fireball again. He'll lose a lot of magic power that way, and it'll take a long time. He began to draw on the board. In order to reduce the influence of this factor, you shouldn't cancel the magic. It's better to immediately apply the transformation method. It is necessary to transform the properties and method of manifesting the magic of the magic circle. He continued writing the formula, and the teacher looked at him in surprise. The magic that is lost during the transformation time can be replenished with the help of the magic circle. All the students stared at him in surprise. No one had expected such a thing from a newcomer. Soon, the formula was complete. The boy was able to write it with ease. Now, he stood in front of the teacher, who looked at the formula in surprise. Han Song thought that right now, he could pretend that he didn't understand anything. But this woman is connected to the hidden fragment. Zhongyun turned around to look at him. The woman asked, "Does he specialize in magic?" "That's what I thought. His file says he's a swordsman." The boy handed the felt-tip pen to the woman and confirmed, "Yes, he's a swordsman, but knows a little bit about magic." The woman marveled. He had solved the problem quite well. Let him sit back down. The other students looked at him in surprise. He won first place as a swordsman, and he also knows magic. Hong looked at Bill and asked, "Such tasks many can solve, can't they?" The guy shook his head. "No, it isn't." Han Sung sat down in his seat. The others only know the theory. The people started whispering again. What kind of speed does he have? Could he possibly be a ranked professional magician? The teacher decided to end the lecture for the day and dismiss the students to their homes. On a small shelf, there were many dumbbells for physical strength training. Han Song seemed to have decided to improve his physical fitness after all. Han Song was lifting dumbbells. They were quite small, but the guy could still feel the strain. He would have to increase his health and strength. There were two people looking at him who seemed to be increasing their physical stats as well. In the general physical hall, mages with low physical stats were practicing. There's definitely no way to meet Hong here. Suddenly, the guy heard someone cursing. Someone really disliked physical activities. It was a guy and a girl about his age. The guy told his girlfriend that if she didn't want to practice, she could just leave. Wait, Julia's a mage too? They walked past him and didn't even seem to be paying any attention. As far as the kid knew, these families were friends. The girl's name was Julia Martin. Suddenly, she turned her attention to our hero and looked up in surprise at him pushing her friend. The guy looked at her irritated. What was the big deal about making up a transformation formula? Anyone can do that. The girl shook her head. She didn't think it was possible to do this if she didn't prepare in advance. The boy sighed heavily and said, "Let her go to sports." Julia suddenly smiled, a small idea flashing through her mind. She looked at her companion with a playful look and asked if she could take this kid in with them. Han Song heard it all, and what he heard made him shake a little. It was as if he was dumbfounded. Take him in? What the hell was that? He tried not to show it, but his whole body trembled with surprise and fear. She said, accept? How he still couldn't believe what he was hearing. He even stopped exercising. A guy who was walking with Julia asked, what the hell is she talking about? The girl waved her hands and laughed and said it was just a joke. That would be too hard for the H place. Besides, he's not a magician. Hansung even was a little upset. This girl just said it like that? What a devil. He immediately pulled himself together, though, and thought that he would have refused anyway, even if such an offer had come his way. Joining a group of student mages whose leader is Gil Sung-hyun is not a good idea. Black Rose, what a silly name. What an unnecessary pathos. Although, you have to take into account that they're years old, so it's no wonder they're doing this shit, and build up their physical strength. He thought his numbers were rising too fast, perhaps because they were initially too low. On top of that, there is a fast growth effect. That's an important factor too. He kept puffing. I didn't think he'd be doping. Of course it's not fair, but who's stopping it? Along with the main quests in this academy, there will be additional quests. Will he be able to survive with such indicators of physical strength? Of course not, so you have to use every available privilege. You can't neglect training. He started swinging the dumbbells even harder. The next day, he went to the casino again. If he had luck, why not use it? He walked with a confident gait, already anticipating what he would win. But he didn't come here for the game alone. He had to find the artifact's owner, the bald guy. He swiveled his head in different directions, but so far he could find nothing but the usual visitors. His target was the wielder of Varvara's bracelet. He had no idea how he would approach this person yet. Finally, he'd found the man. Raymond was sitting at the poker table. It seemed the game was pretty intense. Hansung sat down with a man who was engrossed in a game and didn't seem to notice anything around him. Just as a seat became vacant, the boy was able to discreetly squeeze in closer. To be honest, a little uncomfortable in front of this person, the guy took a few chips and moved all in. Not only was his luck very high, plus, there is a flying quadrocopter that is only visible to users. By the way, the drone hovered right in front of the man, and all his maps were visible. Smiled, pretty atypical system, but what can you do? So, it's simply impossible to lose this game with his trumps. The guy moved his chips forward. Suddenly, another girl sat down to him. The boy looked at her with surprised eyes. It was Song Si-yeon, and she looked at the boy and asked, "What's wrong?" Immediately, goosebumps ran down his back. What was she even doing here? That was something he hadn't expected. The girl looked at him with a benevolent gaze. He's Han Song, isn't he? Han Seong tried his best not to show it, but he was not very good at it. The girl looked at him and said that she didn't expect to see a breakthrough rookie here. The boy realized that this girl was in the business of contract killing, and killing a person was like picking out a flavor of candy for her. That's not good. C.Y. Young took some chips and said the guy's playing pretty good as she sees it. Han Sung. Trying to pull himself together? You have to be serious. It's poker. Still, he managed to get himself cleaned up, and he said in as calm a voice as possible that the girl would see for herself now. She talks too much. Sher Young was surprised at this turn of events and looked at the guy with her eyes open. After a second, a smile appeared on her face. She apparently could barely contain her laughter. Finally, the girl burst into laughter. Of course she did. She laughed with all her heart. If he came here, he should play. The guy looked at her with a surprised look. What's wrong with this girl? It was a relief, however, as he supposed. Everything is going according to his plan. You should have just been nicer to her and not been stupid being around that girl. Let her think he had a plan. Although, to be honest, it would be a little strange if the killer started to get to the bottom of such minutia. The boy clamped a hand over the bridge of his nose. Si-yeon got up from her seat and turned to the dealer to start the game. The female dealer nodded her head and said that the game was about to start. She started shuffling the cards. The guy followed the girl's movements closely. So, here's his plan. Make money off of other people. That's genius, isn't it? And then, lose to Raymond. Raymond, who is a gambler to the bone, will not be able to get up and walk away. However, there is one but. The guy looked at Si-young's chips. He asked the girl in surprise, why did she have so few chips? And indeed, compared to the other players, she seemed to be poor. The girl did not expect such a sharp question, and even for a second, was a little embarrassed looking at the guy. The kid just realized what he said, and he got embarrassed. Oh man, you gotta keep your mouth shut. The girl clenched her fist and said she lost to that bald man today. Well, she'll get her revenge on him. Han Song looked at her, and only remained silent. Okay, not all assassins are good players. The girl holding her head tried to strategize, but she didn't seem to be very good at it. For a second, the guy wondered if the begging sign might help her a bit after all, even somehow feeling sorry for her. Maybe there'll come a time when she'll be his ally? What? He just realized he blew it. The boy rose from his seat and looked forward with surprised eyes. Si-yeon too noticed it too and laughed. Did you really lose? Isn't the expression on his face a little too revealing? However, the problem now was not the game. Shit, I should have known better. The boy grasped the table and tried to steady himself. He was surprised. His legs gave out. What is this man doing? His attention was not on the game at all. A strange man in a black cloak was approaching them. He had long gray hair, and his grandfather wore an elegant black suit with a cape. Also, the man was leaning on a rather busy-looking cane. It was someone who belonged to the villainous night banquet group. His name was Bento, and he was certainly not the one he had expected to see here. A predatory smile stretched across the man's face. A sinister aura began to swirl around this man. His cloak rose up, and he now looked like the main villain from the movie. Why is he here today, and why is he here? The boy stood there trembling with fear. What a very unpleasant surprise. If he doesn't complete the quest, he might actually die. He was standing in the middle of a dark aura, among which nothing could be seen. We have to get out of here, it's too dark. Suddenly, an idea popped into his head. That's right, how could he forget? He had a quadcopter for filming. The guy turned it on immediately. Now, he could see everything perfectly, which means this device is not subject to in-game restrictions. That's great. Si-yeon didn't seem to see anything. The girl rubbed her eyes and tried to get a glimpse of something. While darkness descended on the place, the assassins started jumping up to the regular players and killing them without a murmur. The guy saw it all, and a chill ran down his back. Those night banquet freaks are killing everyone. Yeah, that's what this game was all about, with this creep doing every possible atrocity. Si-young would have stood like that if the guy hadn't grabbed her arm and dragged her towards him. The girl seemed to come out of her stupor. She looked at the boy with surprised and frightened eyes. He shouted for the girl to follow him immediately, and without waiting for a reply, he moved toward the hall. She ran after him, but still, she couldn't see anything, and she was afraid of falling. Mentally, the guy apologized to her, but he can't wait now. Enemies are approaching from all sides. Their leader, that was their ultimate goal, or at least to get out of here. So also he had 3 assistants, 3 of his closest associates. Also, rookies who are right now, being tested. One of the murderers approached the innocent victim and grabbed her by the throat. The guys immediately stopped, just a few steps away from him. The killer's blood splattered on his victim's face. The assassin looked at them with a lifeless look, as if he read madness in his face. He smiled his creepy smile. He was definitely insane. There were drops of blood on his face. Immediately, goosebumps ran down the kid's back. The devil! They're not going to let them go that easily now. Han-sung ordered his friend to hide somewhere until she could see in the dark. The girl nodded her head. Okay, she'll join as soon as she can see properly. The girl was a little scared herself. The boy thought that this girl was holding up well, unlike the others, who were literally paralyzed with fear. This killer has already started using his own spell to catch up with his victims. This freak is using magic! Magic circles appeared above his hands, and he prepared to attack. Fire spells and electric spells flew in different directions. Han-sung tried to dodge, and the situation was escalating. This person seems to have pretty good skills. Is he too strong for a beginner? The man was throwing spells in different directions. He didn't seem to care who he attacked at all. But the guy could clearly see the magic he was using, and the moment the assassin was distracted, he would be able to attack him. He'll apply magical superiority, and then at least level the odds. The guy held out his hand, and immediately began to apply his spell. Time went by in seconds. A sphere began to form in his hands. The assassin was shocked. His spell suddenly weakened, and he could no longer attack. Han-sung extracted magic power from him. That was his ability. Doing so was quite difficult. Even though the assassin couldn't see the magic, he immediately realized that it was trying to stop him. Magic spell bracelets immediately appeared on his hands. They were bright yellow light. Looks like it was physical strengthening magic. This is bad. He's going to fight in hand-to-hand since magic doesn't work. The killer rushed straight at the boy swinging his fists, in which case there was only one option. Use your spell now. The guy clenched his fist and aimed all his power directly at the fleeing assassin. In that case, he would give him back his magic. The guy released a stream of magical energy directly at the attacker. The assassin definitely didn't expect this, and he couldn't even stay on his feet. He fell to the ground, and his magic circles collapsed. The assailant was lying on the ground and appears to be either dead or unconscious. Han Song breathed heavily. This spell was very difficult for him since he was still at such a low level. It seemed he had used too much magic power and had reached his limit. Now he had to think about his own life. Shi Young appeared out of nowhere and helped the boy from falling on the floor. She seems to have recovered. Now, she could see in the dark. She asked in a frightened voice if he was okay. The guy, breathing heavily, said he needed a gun. Suddenly, the girl handed him the bracelet he was looking for. He looked at her in surprise. Smiling, the girl replied that he could probably use that too. It was the exact same bracelet Barbara had. Where did she get it from? The boy took the bracelet with trembling hands. Smiling, the girl said that during the poker game he only had eyes for him, and she immediately realized that the guy was after him. With a wave of her hand, she said that actually she had stolen this to use herself, but since the guy had saved her, let her use it. Han Sung looked at the bracelet with surprise and joy at the same time. With that kind of guesswork, I wish she was playing poker. The guy thanked her with a trembling voice. He turned to the girl and asked if she had turned in her gun at the entrance. The girl replied that she had just hidden it. At that moment, he realized that he had been very stupid. He should have hidden the weapon in his inventory instead of giving it away. Well, he finally found it. It seemed like the right sword. The other assassins saw their comrade lying unconscious, but they couldn't figure out who could do such a thing. Finally, they noticed the intruders and turned their sights on them. Han Sung nimbly jumped over the fence and said that he had already found a weapon suitable for fighting. Si Young said she would take one assassin on herself. The girl pulled out her curved dagger. The guy looked at her with a skeptical expression and asked her if she was sure she could handle it. The girl replied that it was up to him to talk about it. And really, she was in 8th place, and this guy's under. They prepared for battle. The assassins approached in great leaps and bounds. The boys grasped their weapons. Shi Young Mig turned into a shadow. She literally dissolved into thin air and started moving at an incredible speed. In a second, there was only a small shadow where the girl had been standing. The guy didn't even realize it. She was moving at an incredible speed. The killers didn't even seem to notice her. Si Yeon grew up literally out of nowhere and prepared her dagger for a sneak attack. A second later, she stuck a curved blade into the shoulder of one of the assassins, and the man gave a suppressed yelp. Immediately, the girl vanished again, leaving behind only a patch of shadow. The others turned to look at their comrade in surprise. Han Song realized that the girl was already used to the darkness, so this kind of place was even advantageous for her. As long as there was an opportunity, he would use the items of the barbarian. He cut his hand with a sharp movement, and blood flowed from the small wound. Health less than 10%, which is quite satisfactory. Now, we need to use the blood. Little trickles of blood flowed straight to the bracelet. As soon as the blood hit the bracelet, the guy felt some kind of vibration that spread throughout his body. Varvar's bracelet began to react. It started to exude incredible energy spreading throughout his body. Suddenly, the guy felt himself gaining strength, as if an electric shock ran through his body. However, it was not that simple. This effect only lasted minutes, and the wait for rollback was hours. But the effect is not bad. He pushed himself off the ground and ran forward, his strength adding up nicely. He ran up to one of the assassins in one great leap and swung his weapon. He swung so fast that even the assassin couldn't see it coming. The sword seemed to go right through. The attacker was even a little frightened. He sighed heavily and bounced back at the last moment. A shadow of fear fell over his face. He was now genuinely afraid for his life. Han Song didn't even think of stopping. He approached him so fast that the assassin couldn't even blink. His movements became fast and precise in a second, something he hadn't expected of himself. The blows fell like rain. His body seemed to move on its own. He had never had such skills before, and now he was fighting like a true barbarian. He threw one punch at him, but the killer didn't seem to react. They bounced off each other and prepared for another attack. The sound of swords clashing in the air. Right now, they are roughly equal in strength. Now, it's all about skill. But in minutes, when the reinforcements wear off, the difference between their stats will be too great, and this assassin will be able to take him down in one hit. As soon as he thought that, the assassin immediately approached him and struck once more with his sword. The guy immediately started to defend himself. He didn't want to use it, but there didn't seem to be much of a way out. He called up the system store. It was necessary to buy some skill or some new equipment. After a second, the purchase was made. The guy bought the light ball skill. The assassin irritatedly asked, "What was that guy mumbling there?" and immediately rushed into the next attack. Han Song loudly turned to the girl so that she could hear him. Guy ordered her to close her eyes tightly so she wouldn't go blind. Immediately, he raised his hand in the air. A bright white light spilled throughout the space. The ball of light had worked perfectly. The assassin immediately squeezed his eyes shut and covered them with his hands to try not to go blind. A bright white orb was burning in the boy's hands. With this skill, he would definitely be able to dispel the darkness around him. Then it would become much easier. However, there was one problem. Well, as always. It turned out that as soon as the boy used his spell, the main villain started looking at him. This man immediately developed an interest in his magical abilities. As soon as the darkness dissipated, the guy approached one of the assassins, and with one sharp swipe of his sword, killed him. Oh man, he took out one opponent, but it got worse. The boy looked over to where Bento was standing, but he seemed to have disappeared. That's a problem. However, a second later, the villain appeared, literally a few steps away from the boy who continued to hold the sword. The man looked at him with fierce eyes, the way a vulture looks at its prey. Since the bracelet's expired, I'll have to rely on my own strength. It's too dangerous. He still doesn't have enough strength to defeat such an opponent. Suddenly, behind the villain's back, the guy saw Si Young, who seemed to be preparing to jump. What an idiot. I have to. She's going to die. It's too dangerous. I should have come up with a plan. If the guy screams now, the villain will spot her and kill her immediately. He won't have time to save her. The girl had already prepared for the bar. However, it seems she won't be able to attack it stealthily. What to do? They stood facing each other with their weapons crossed. One more second, and it seemed that something irreversible would happen. Bento's sword approached his throat, and he could already feel the coldness of that steel. Where did that sword come from? He didn't even notice it, did he? What the fuck? It seemed to be the same cane that the villain carried with him at all times. He held it tightly, pointing it straight at the boy. Han Sung realized that he needed to calm down now, and think about what to do next time. Bento laughed lightly. He felt his superiority. But now something happened that the boy had not expected. He looked at the bastard in surprise, but he kept laughing. The man continued to laugh, his body shuddering with laughter. He immediately hid his sword back, and it turned into an ordinary cane. Funny, in such a situation, the boy didn't even blink an eye. Is he letting him go? Bento says he's sorry, but that's enough for today. He hoped the guy would be stronger next time. The man immediately glowed with a purple glow. Not even a second later, only a small shadow took the place of the villain, which also immediately vaporized. Han Song stood there, not understanding anything. Just a second ago, he was on the verge of death, but now the villain had just retreated? As soon as the darkness receded, many casino employees rushed into the hall. Take care of the safety of the visitors first. Surprisingly, the guards arrived quickly. Han Song was almost exhausted. He fell to his knees and breathed heavily. He still had that primal fear in his heart. Just a second ago, he thought he was going to die. Night descended on the city, and a large white moon came into the sky, dispersing the clouds with it. Shi Young was sitting in her room, just staring at one point. The girl was plagued with funny thoughts. Why can't she stop thinking about yesterday's incident? Images from yesterday came to mind. She faced this kind of thing all the time in her normal life. However, there was one difference today that wouldn't get out of my head. Lee Han Sung, the strange candidate who won first place in the practical exam. The girl thought for a moment. It's just the kind of person he is, nothing more. And who is he anyway? What's the big deal about him? Just because he chased away the night's banquet? That he helped her? The girl couldn't understand. He didn't even flinch at the attack. She remembered the moment when the guy had ordered her to hide until she could see. As she pondered this, she imperceptibly blushed. Why couldn't he get out of her head? The girl thought about it. She couldn't get her thoughts together. Eventually, she got sick of it, and the girl jumped up from her seat. How infuriating. She just couldn't get over it. She sprang to her weapon and snatched up a small blade. But then she stopped right there. Maybe she wants to kill him. She feels the pleasure of killing him. That's right. She looked in the opposite direction and frowned even more. Swinging her arm, she threw her dagger forward with all her might. The shotgun flew a few meters and crashed into the nearest rock. Or was it a specially prepared one? She finally had an epiphany, that's right. All we have to do is kill him, then it'll all be over. She looked at her hand that just had a dagger in it, but how to do it? He was first on the exam, despite a H-place finish in what happened yesterday. She could get hurt herself. She had dark thoughts, but when it comes to murder, she's no match for it. That's right, she had now made her decision, final and irrevocable. Today, this rookie is her main target. She's going to kill him no matter what. First and foremost, you can't lose sight of him. The girl clenched her fist, her intentions seeming more serious than they seemed. The next day, the boy went to the academy as usual. Unfortunately, he didn't get a big reward, but his abilities recovered in just a day instead of 2. That's already good. Still, it was a great accomplishment for a player like him. He looked at his stats thoughtfully. Plus, he had gotten popularity points. Should he buy a low-level random chest? Yes, he bought a chest and immediately started to open it. In front of him was a small cube. I wish I could get rare rank skills again. He's got a Halen orb. It's an artificial intelligence assistant. Now that's not bad, but the guy still didn't understand. Why would he do that? And what kind of class is that, Soul? What's that supposed to mean? Where did it even come from here? The highest ranked item with no category just appeared for no reason? He still couldn't believe his luck. But couldn't he be that lucky? It was an assistant with artificial intelligence, and of such a high rank. It was a gift of fate. It's a soul encased in a relic. And it, in turn, has been converted using human technology. The result is a high-level artificial intelligence, which doesn't fit into any category. He was certainly lucky. Could this item manifest so easily? This artificial intelligence has a function of growing. Together with the host, if how properly engaged in it, it will become a good assistant. But suddenly, the guy saw something strange. There were gaps in the item description. Could it be some kind of system glitch or bug? Either way, it's weird. I didn't get anything either. This artifact was simply resisted as soon as someone wanted to view the information. The level of information viewing was insufficient. Hansong, surprised, looked at the artifacts that began to blaze right in front of him. What kind of item is this? Is such a thing even possible? It was a pity that he couldn't get the full information. At least the basic functions should be used. Perhaps it would be better to install it in the camera of your quadcopter. Then it will not break under any circumstances. Suddenly, the artifact itself began to move toward the quadricopter. In a second, he literally flew into it and seemed to become one with the machine. Now, the drone itself began to glow with the same blue light. Suddenly, a mechanical voice was heard, greeting its owner. Well, at least that works fine. The boy asked, "What features can I use right now?" Responded that schedule, management, finance, refunctions, and so on are now available. It could use the functions of personal as well as defense with low efficiency. It was a shield. The boy hesitated for a moment. Finally, he's starting to get it. As this artifact grows, it will be able to activate vital functions. Could the shield be a skill? Is this shield created with magic? The drone seemed to read his mind and replied that it was a supernatural ability. The boy nodded. Not bad, since it didn't require magic power, when he ordered his assistant to check his schedule and make an immediate plan of action. It's given him some free time, but he's still loaded with cases. The machine is going to next point. He arrived at the academy. It was still as crowded as ever. In the gymnasium, you could hear the thumping of something heavy. Wooden points everywhere. Heavy breathing could be heard. One of the students appeared to be practicing the martial arts of sword wielding. He was swinging a long wooden stick. Finally, he finished his workout and held the stick up to himself. The boy stopped, breathing heavily. Apparently, the training had been pretty hard. He was still instinctively holding the stick in his hands. The guy looked to be about the same age as the protagonist. Suddenly, he heard pops coming from the other side, and he turned his eyes back in surprise. The guy lost sweat from his face. Apparently, he didn't neglect exercise. Hansung stood nearby and clapped his hands, looking at the guy with admiration. The guy's name was Sergei, and the guy came up to Sergei and praised him. Sergei looked at the boy in surprise and asked how he knew him. Indeed, they had never seen each other before. Hansung suddenly yanked himself. Ouch. It's not like they're as close as they were in the last game. Perhaps he had overstayed his welcome. He shook his head and said that it's just that Sergei is very famous. It's impossible not to know someone who inherited the talent of a swordmaster. Sergei coughed and was a little embarrassed even. He said that his level wasn't that high. The guy kept looking at him as if trying to make eye contact, but Sergei seemed embarrassed. He thought to himself that it was a good thing that in this world the languages of the whole world translated themselves automatically. He didn't even know Russian, and it was unlikely that Sergei would understand Korean. Suddenly, the man turned around and said that it seems the newcomer is also quite famous in the academy. He managed to come first in the practical test, right? So everyone knows about him too. Han-sung grinned. Not much is known about him at all. He's more interested in skill, or rather in being honed. Sergei averted his eyes and seemed to frown because he liked to be praised, and he was also incredibly proud of his lifelong skill. So it was a good way to get him to trust him. Sergei asked the boy. He was specializing in ball skills too, right? The boy nodded his head in the affirmative. So there they were in agreement. Although Han-sung still has a lot to learn, his skill isn't high enough to be proud of right now. The guy took hold of the stick and looked at Sergei with a searching look. He would like to learn something from him, like a trick. The guy was trying hard to make contact. If he praised Sergei and continued to admire his skills, maybe something would happen. Sergei wondered, what's another trick? He liked it when someone extolled his merits, and it seemed the guy had hit the right spot and hit the bullseye. Sergei smiled and said that in that case he was glad to meet them. He wanted to meet the person who had won first place in the exam. It was a great honor after all. This academy values bright students, so they would find a common ground. Han-sung rejoiced at his ingenuity. He's hooked. Now, the guy would be able to naturally arouse his interest in him. Well, you can't ignore such a good sign. He grasped the stick and said that now they could start. The way to make friends with Sergei is to show interest in his occupation, as well as complimenting him. They stood across from each other and held on to their sticks. A little sparring wouldn't hurt, especially since they were converging in their specialties. It wasn't a bad idea to build a relationship with him, and this was the first step. Sergei rushed at his opponent, swinging his stick. He prepared to strike with precision. This man had been practicing fencing for quite a long time, so fighting him would be quite a challenge. He swung the stick, and it began to cut through the air with a whistling sound. He was an experienced swordsman, so now Sonu would have to try his best to stay with him for as long as possible. The guy blocked Sergei's punch. Although he was skillful, it was not difficult to block such a straight punch. He was moving quite nimbly, so he was on the horse for now. Sergei was surprised that this newcomer could handle him so easily. Did he really have such high skills? It wouldn't be that hard to beat his ball skills, so the guy handled it easily. Sergei couldn't believe it. How did he manage to block his punch? He's been practicing his whole life. This couldn't have happened. How could this guy have such experience? He put all his strength into that punch. What the fuck? The guy was even a little scared of this outcome. For a second, he thought he was going to get beaten up. Han-sung was focused on the fight. He couldn't fail, because it depended on whether or not he could get along with this man. He had to make as many friends as he could at this academy, and at this rate, it could work out. The first shot was blocked almost perfectly. In addition, he was able to disrupt Sergei's position now. This will surely hinder him. Of course, he loses to him in physical fitness. That's obvious. However, he can analyze from past experience of his game and is not fully formed technique. This guy moves too fast and doesn't always calculate his punches. He saw Sergei's every weakness, and he read his every move. Every habit, he had it in the palm of his hand. Han-sung looked at him and smiled. Well, already, let him be his ally. If he had to defeat Sergei to do so, he would definitely do so. The sparring continued. Heavy stick blows could be heard everywhere. The guys were practically at their limit. In the end, Sergei was exhausted. He was breathing heavily. The guy didn't expect the newcomer to be able to rattle him like that. His whole body felt like it was cramped. How did this happen? He's been training his whole life. It's impossible to say. The guys split up. Sergei didn't understand what was the matter. What is it? Why is this guy anticipating everything and his movements? It just couldn't be like that. The boy looked at his arm, which was shaking from overexertion. He was physically superior to him. If he was able to attack normally even once, it would not be an easy blow. Sergei was completely confident in his strength. However, something was wrong. The boy breathed heavily and looked at his hand in surprise. But what had happened? He hadn't succeeded once? This just couldn't be happening. This boy's swordsmanship is amazing. He was holding his stick, which was already broken. It just couldn't have been before. Why is this happening? He's trying and doing his best to win. So what's the matter? The guy felt like he was hitting a wall and he would never be able to win. He had never met this level of weapon proficiency before. Why? He was breathing heavily and trying to concentrate, but it was very difficult. All the thoughts in his head jumbled up. This guy was far too far superior to him in possession. There was simply no way this could happen. The boy pondered, anger and pride raging inside him. He couldn't lose to such a newcomer, could he? He's only ranked after all. So why did this happen? He frowned and gritted his teeth. So how did he do it? The boy thought, but still couldn't understand what was happening. He clenched his fist in front of him, as if his opponent had read his thoughts and asked him how he managed to beat him. But how did he know what Sergei was thinking? At that moment, a frost ran down the guy's skin. As soon as Sergei heard that, he raised his head fearfully. His opponent was standing in front of him, and the echidna was smiling as if he was reading his mind. Just at this thought, a chill ran down his back. How is this even possible? Who is this guy? Han Song looked at his hand and said that it was just experience. He wasn't the least bit tired during the battle, since he knew and could anticipate any actions of his opponent, so there was no difficulty in this. The only way to master a sword perfectly is if you have a lot of experience. Sergei stopped, and it was as if he swallowed his tongue. He didn't expect to hear such a thing from this newcomer. Where did he get his experience from? Han Song smiled and was incredibly proud of himself. These were Sergei's words from the last game. The guy was incredibly pleased that he could use such a tactic. Well then, this would be easier than he thought. He seemed to have succeeded in impressing the guy. Still, Sergei couldn't accept it. How could he have so much experience? Han Song read his mind and said that just because they were the same age, it didn't mean we had the same experience. Sergei said he has a lot of experience too, so what's the problem? Han Song asked, does he only have team fights and one-on-one fights? The guy said it like he was mocking. He knew every weakness of this character, since he had spent countless hours in this game. So now he knew every trick he could use to make friends with the characters. Yes, all that advantage he had is true. It's true that through his past games, he's become very familiar with the laws of the game. Also, he's had experience fighting even Sergei and knows his sword technique. Sergei continued to stare at him with a surprised look. Although in years, he would not be able to keep up with Sergei's skill level. Sergei continued to stare. Just experience? But for now, even if this person doesn't understand it, let everything stay in its place. The protagonist looked at him with a calm gaze. He repeated, yes, it's just an experience. There seemed to be complete calmness in his eyes, even though Sergei was perplexed. It's even funny if you watch from the side. Han Song said in a serious voice that he had spent a lot of time on the battlefield and had seen many things. There, he had time to learn how to read his opponent properly. The guy said it as if he was already a seasoned military man, although to some extent he was, but only under the conditions of the game. So actually, he wasn't lying. As soon as Sergei heard that, he was horrified, on the battlefield. He couldn't believe that this rookie could fight anywhere. But where? He had just entered the academy. What does he mean? Sergei was puzzled. He wanted to learn as much as possible about this strange man. How did he even know such fighting techniques? However, the guy waved his hand and said that they would sometimes measure their strength. After that, he turned around and went to the other end of the hall to the exit. He left Sergei completely bewildered, alone with his thoughts. The guy still couldn't understand. How was this even happening? Khan had already left, and Sergei was still standing in the middle of the training room, looking somewhere in the direction of the training room. One thing he could not get out of his head, where he had already been on the battlefield. Could it be that his family was some kind of military? He clutched the broken stick tightly in his hands, and still couldn't believe that this guy, a simple student at first glance, was able to defeat him so easily. The academy was buzzing with activity, with students going to classes and listening to boring lectures and waiting to finally go to their dorms or to practice. Suddenly, a shadow swept through the corridors, a shadow that would have been unnoticeable if it had been there. It slid across the floor and disappeared around a corner. Si Yeon literally grew out of that shadow and hid behind the door jamb. She seemed to be spying on someone. The girl tried to be as quiet as possible so as not to draw attention to herself. If she wanted to, she could have been overlooked. Of course, she was watching our hero, his every move. Then, when she decided to kill him at night, the thought literally took over her mind. The girl watched in amazement as the guy practiced. What was he even doing here? Did he come to practice? While the girl was watching him, the guy didn't even notice anything, as if nothing had happened, and continued to hone his weapon skills. The girl didn't understand. Why did he come here to train? She was still trying to give me away, hiding behind the door. She watched the guy's every move. She didn't understand why she was so interested in this man. He didn't stand out in any way, except, of course, for the fact that he took first place and saved her life a couple times. But still, tall and handsome guys are much better. And besides, with that kind of looks, why was she so interested in him? The girl still couldn't give herself an answer to that question. She sighed heavily and thought dreamily about how great it would be if she got a murderer like her. That would be fun. They could kill us with him. That would be fun. But why was she having these thoughts? She looked at him again. The girl seemed to be immersed in her reverie. She seemed to have forgotten why she was here in the first place. Wow, looks like someone's in love. She seemed to realize what she was thinking right away and grabbed her head. What was wrong with her? Ever since last night, she hasn't gotten this strange new guy out of her head. Why was she even thinking about it? What the hell is killing on a bet? That's not why she came here at all. She had come here to watch him, not to sit here under the door and daydream. The girl suddenly and unexpectedly blushed. Was she looking for her ideal man? She held her head and tried to put her thoughts in order. Suddenly, Bull appeared from the door of the gym and looked at the girl. The boy asked in a silent voice if she could keep her voice down. As soon as the girl heard his voice, and her eyes widened in surprise and fright. The guy was incredibly calm all the time. He said that if she came here to check on him, she should just let him watch in silence and not bother anyone. He seemed annoyed about something, or he was in a bad mood as usual. Sion asked him, "Is he here because of the new guy too?" The guy sighed and asked, "And can't she keep her voice down?" They both seemed to be pursuing the same goal. The girl waved her hand and said he was too boring. "Why can't you make some noise?" Even though she knew in her heart she was doing something stupid. It seemed like her head was a mess lately. The guys continued practicing on swords. Sergei was practically at the limit of his abilities, but his opponent by some miracle parried all his blows, and now it was almost impossible to hit him. In addition, in his head he was thinking about where this guy was able to get such a mastery of weapons. What the hell were combat missions? Shi Young quietly peeked out from around the corner and continued to follow her plan. Now, only she was being quieter. Indeed, if she gave herself away, she would have to explain what she was doing here. Even from afar, you can see that Sergei is now in a confused state. Is this guy so good with the sword that even an experienced fighter like Sergei feels awkward? His scores are higher, but he's inferior to the newcomer. Han Buell too looked in that direction and wondered. It looked amazing. This was the first time the guy had ever seen such skill, but why? How does he have this kind of skill? The girl spread her arms and looked at the guy in surprise. Yeah, surprise either? This newcomer was much stronger than she expected. The girl seemed to be delighted, but what was there to be surprised about? Let's say he's experienced. Maybe he's studied somewhere else, and it never crossed his mind. The boy continued to stand, watching the newcomer's every move. He couldn't even imagine that this was even possible. The guys, meanwhile, were practicing hard. Here you could hear the clatter of their guns. They were moving almost at the limit of their abilities, or rather, only Sergei, the newcomer, as if playing with him, parrying his every move. Sergei, with his years of training experience, could not even imagine that he would face such an opponent. Suddenly, there was a cracking sound, and the training stick that Sergei had suddenly broke. It couldn't take another blow. The boy sighed heavily and looked at his stick in surprise. It's not possible. How he did it, 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 how he did it. Han Buell continued to watch and didn't make a sound. He only watched the battle thoughtfully as he analyzed every movement, and he could hardly believe that an ordinary freshman could possess such skills. It was simply incomprehensible. He noticed how the newcomer had increased his speed at the last moment and had become unusually strong in those techniques that required magical powers. His body seemed to be covered with magical energy, as if it were a shield and at the same time a reinforcing spell. And to compensate for his lack of physical skill, he decided to break Sergei's sword. Indeed, how could he not have guessed? But it still boggled the mind. This kid's more dangerous than he looks. We'll have to be careful. Who knows what he's got in mind? We may have to fight him. Sergei stood at a loss. He didn't expect his sword to break so quickly. It was impossible. How did he do that? The boy stopped for a second and tried to come to his senses. As soon as he realized that his sword had cracked in half, an expression of extreme incomprehension appeared on his face. He was even a little afraid for his life. All he had to do was to accept defeat since his weapon was broken. At that time, the two men stood inconspicuously outside the door and kept watching. The guy said that they had too much difference in ability. Sion smiled and said that his ball technique was impressive despite his stats. Boel sighed. Once again, this fool is talking to herself. It was starting to annoy the guy. Why does she even admire him so much? He turned to her and asked if she knew him well. The girl shook her head and said that they had just run into each other once, so she understood. The guy looked at her with a steely gaze. He had once exchanged a few words with her a couple times when he was on special at hero school. The girl noticed his stare and looked at him in surprise. He remembered the first time he'd seen her at school. She was well aware that she had a difficult temper, and if she didn't like something, it would immediately fly into a fight. Yeah, the girl had a temper. Maybe at least in the academy she'd come to her senses, although that was highly unlikely. He asked her in surprise. Did she always talk like that? He didn't remember it. The girl looked at him in surprise, as if she didn't understand anything. He changed again, and became arrogant again. Yeah, or maybe she didn't. The guy realized all his hunches had gone to shit. Yeah, she's still the same. They continued to eavesdrop, and they heard Han Song asking a question to his opponent. Just in a team battle and one-on-one fight, they stood across from each other and talked, not even noticing how they were being watched. It didn't seem to matter to them right now. Han Bayul tightened his teeth. Even with investigation, he couldn't dig up anything about her questioning past. So, who is he, and why did he end up here? He even hands out advice to Sergei. But suddenly, something came to his ear that silenced him. He heard the newcomer say that he had spent a very long time on the battlefield. The girl heard it too, and has apparently thought about it. A battlefield? But humans haven't fought wars amongst themselves for a long time? Then how is that even possible? Everyone fell silent, trying to understand something. The man also pondered, yes, that's right, humans haven't fought amongst themselves for a long time now, but only waged battles with monsters. It was in the Black Land that was one of the first to be attacked by monsters. It was then that the first monsters appeared there. It was there that people began to flock, to fight back against the monsters. Suddenly, a phrase came to the girl's ears that shocked her. Child of the Black Earth. As soon as she heard it, she was immediately startled. An expression of extreme concern appeared on her face as well. How is this even possible? Buell, who had been standing next to her all this time, suddenly turned around and without saying a word, moved in the opposite direction. The girl didn't even have time to say anything. The girl looked at him and asked irritably, "What's wrong?" He says he wants to watch himself and leaves. What a strange guy. However, the guy didn't say a word, but just walked briskly towards the exit. All right, let her go. The girl pondered, but what does an orphan of the Black Land mean? The thought kept her in suspense, and her suspicion grew even stronger. Black Earth is the place where the fiercest and most brutal battles with monsters take place. Only experienced fighters who have been trained and have already proven themselves in battles are sent there. But what was this newcomer doing there? The girl wondered. Even her parents, who had trained her all her life for assassinations not allowed in every way, warned her against going there alone. How was that even possible? The girl stood by the door and thought. So this guy's been living in such a dangerous place for so long? It's the only explanation she could think of. Then I see what this is all about. The girl clammed up. It sounded pretty cool, but she couldn't say he wasn't good for anything at all. Stop. Why did her thoughts change so drastically? The girl realized it too and grabbed her head again. She kept thinking about something else. What was even wrong with her today? Why was she suddenly following this guy so closely? And why had she changed her opinion of him? She crouched down and started holding her head. What was she thinking about? Why would she even have such stupid thoughts in her head? The girl tried to get her head in order, after all. She needed to get herself together. She didn't come here for that at all. Soon, the training session was over, and the girl vanished, so as not to arouse suspicion. She had to clean herself up. Something was definitely wrong with her today. Han Song stood in his room and studied the new skills in the skill menu. There was only one thing he didn't understand. What was it? One of the main characters is paying attention to you. One of the main characters is wary of you. One of the main characters is showing interest in you. Your popularity has increased to points. That's interesting. The boy stood looking nervously at the sign. It was strange to him. Did Sergei really have that much interest in him? He drank a mug of tea and realized that there was more interest in him than he had anticipated. Suddenly, a quadricopter flew up to him and informed him that the assembly was done. The new drone had been delivered. Good. Everything is going according to plan, and even better. From that moment, as he found himself in this game and seems to be stuck here for a long time and throwing dice, until this moment, he kept taking videos and storing them on a medium to later publish. He was sitting on his couch, studying the sign. But there's no internet connection in this world, so you see there's no way to download the video. That's too bad. We'll have to wait until he's back in the regular world. The guy was upset about it. Well, what he was hoping for. He's in the virtual world, so he's going to be a YouTuber here. He was hoping someone would watch. However, the views have held steady at 0 people. No one has seen his videos. Is he an idiot? But there's still no update in the real world, so he can't publish videos. He turned to his drone and ordered it to synchronize the data with the camera on the new drone. The artificial intelligence confirmed the synchronization. In this world, there is also a video hosting like YouTube. Well, if he starts posting videos there, he will be able to gain popularity points faster. But he has to figure out how this social network works because it's his first time here. Good thing there's internet. Even in the game, he is confident in the popularity of his videos. The guy took a mug of tea and prepared for his popularity to skyrocket. You can't beat being a blogger. You've got to at least try. Soon, he was back on the training ground where the portal was. He had to go to a new dungeon. This was the surroundings of Gangwon-do province, a place where monsters lived. He would have to fight new monsters. He hoped that these things would be much weaker than normal monsters. After all, they were new. It would be strange if he had to face these monsters again. How would he fight them? We'll have to hope for our luck. It was practically a lesson, so time to show what he's learned. Training. You need to show your skills. You thought you weren't a beginner anymore? You're just a baby out of the egg. They're still hiding behind the storyline. Let him show his skills and take it to the next level. Conditions. Completely subdue the training troll. If successful, 1. Random chest of mid-level potion popularity points. If unsuccessful, reputation change. This was the default monster skirmish. The guy was studying the terms of the problem. Practically a lesson with 2 teachers. Here, he would be able to reveal his skills. Yes, he had managed to pump himself up a bit during this time, and now he was even more confident in his abilities. He had such a rapid growth that he seemed to be able to handle these things with ease. It was possible that there would be some kind of emergency quest. Something like that gave him a headache. Stop thinking and act. They moved into the thicket of the forest to meet the training monster. The day was beautiful. The sun was shining everywhere, and the day promised to be good and fruitful. The only thing was that they would have to try harder. Someone's fist slammed into a powerful body that apparently suffered no visible damage, but the impact was hard, and the skin on it began to curl up. It was Hong. He hit the monster with all his might. It was a training troll. The monster didn't manage to stay on its feet and flew off in the opposite direction. After all, the boy hadn't been practicing in the gym for nothing all this time. Now he couldn't handle monsters in hand-to-hand combat. Keel applied his spells. He was a skilled mage, so his magic spells worked at long range, and no monster would be able to approach him within attacking distance, so the guy was completely safe. He attacked the monster with his spells, and now the monster was defeated. The 2 of them could handle the monster with ease, so there was nothing to worry about. However, the boys were still wary. Even though this was a training session, the instructors didn't seem to be in the mood to give them an easy lesson. The boys were looking around, so they could be sure that no creatures would slip past them. But then, the guys noticed our hero, who had been standing behind them in relative safety all this time. They seemed to have done all the work for him, and were now very unhappy that they had such an ally. The boy noticed it too, and asked his virtual assistant, "What's wrong with them?" The mechanical voice said that these guys seemed to have a wary look on their faces, looking at him with a kind of contempt. "I think he's done something wrong again." He looked in the direction where the girls were standing. Well, here everything is unclear. Someone looked at him with caution, and someone with contempt. Why was he attracting such attention? Yes, he wanted to be popular, but not like this. Suddenly, birds soared into the sky. They flew forward with a loud sound, as if they were startled by something. Apparently, the one standing there was quite large and dangerous, and so it was, and suddenly there was a roar. As soon as the boy heard it, he was very frightened, and everyone else was alert as well. Chi-yeon looked in the direction where the voice was coming from. It seems that this is their trial. A huge horn appeared from behind the trees. It seemed the owner of this horn was much larger than they had thought. Now, this seems to be the real test troll. Now, it's up to them to catch it. Hansung didn't seem surprised by this, but rather frightened. He knew it. This game couldn't just end like this. Now, they would have to fight this huge monster if they wanted to advance further. Looking at this monster, it was clear that there would be no fight. Now they saw the head of the monster. It was much bigger than the last monster. It was several meters tall and towered to the very tops of the trees. Its eyes were white, and its mouth had sharp fangs. Worst of all, there seemed to be several of these giants, if not dozens of them, rumbling towards the test subjects. Something was too many of them, and how to deal with it all. It sucked. If he could handle one for too long, it would be extremely difficult now. The others also saw the monsters approaching. How many of them are there? Why the fuck are there so many of them? The guys were frightened, as they realized that it would be extremely difficult to deal with these monsters, but they didn't have much. The teacher, as soon as he saw such a huge crowd of monsters approaching them, ordered his candidates to go to the gate immediately. "We must run." The guys realized that they were in danger, so they turned around and ran to the exit of the location. However, what they saw plunged them even more and horrified them. The gate was not working. The exit from the location was blocked. It was unclear whether it was some kind of glitch or whether they had been given the task on purpose so that they could deal with it. Hansung looked at his tablet. An announcement popped up. Extra quests. Suddenly there were ogres. The pursuers can fight 7 ogres, and he and the main character need to destroy 3 of them. Conditions. Stop the ogres until the rescue brigade arrives. The time limit is minutes. If successful, 1 random chest of mid-rank potions. If unsuccessful, death of one of the main characters. One of the candidates is hiding and thinking about something. Hong stood nearby and prepared himself. The teachers try to help the candidates get out of the forest. Even if a high-ranked hunter fights 10 ogres, he would either get seriously injured or die altogether. Hong threw off his clothes and shouted, "What will help the teachers deal with the monsters?" Jin wasn't the kind of guy who would silently watch this. The guy was quite hardy, so he immediately rushed to help. Everyone else looked in his direction in surprise. If it became too dangerous, they would have to leave. Bayul immediately joined him without a second thought. Sung Hyun followed suit immediately. They acted like a real team. Thus, the 3 characters united into one coherent team. The guy watched them from behind and watched their every move. This was going to be a real serious battle, and there was no room for slippage. The guy realized that he couldn't let any of them die in this fight. He approached them and said that he would help too. Hong nodded his head. All right, together with him they could do it too. Sion looked at them with surprise and even some fear. These candidates are out of their minds. The guy shifted his surprised gaze to her. What did she expect? If one has to fight such a quest, do they really have a choice? Stand and watch them from afar? The girl apparently noticed his gaze and said that she was a killer by nature though, but that's why big monsters are bad to deal with. Let him not expect too much from her here. The guy wondered to himself, why did this girl suddenly join them? She prefers to work alone, doesn't she? But in any case, it's not bad, because they have an increase in strength. With these abilities, their chances of defeating the ogres increases many times over. The boy looked at the scoreboard. Suddenly, he swung his hand and released several of his drones into the air, which were called to aid them in battle. There was a buzzing sound, and a whole swarm of mechanical creatures flew straight up into the air. The girl, surprised, and at the same time frightened, asked, "What are these? Are they drones?" The guy, as if nothing happened, replied that he opened his own channel and would like to film such a spectacular sight. It must be popular among them. The girl was surprised, and even angry, and asked, "Is he going to make a video in such a situation?" The guy looked at her with surprise. Why is she surprised? It's funny. He seemed to take it for granted. Hong looked at the monsters, and after assessing his strength, he ran first. This guy didn't seem to be afraid of anything. Even if he was facing a monster as tall as a multi-story building, he would be the first to rush in like this. The guy pushed himself off the ground, and with a quick leap began to approach the monsters. He seemed to be confident in his strength, and did not plan to retreat. The guys followed him. Even though the guy was quite big, he was quite fast. They could hardly keep up with him after all. The physical training was taking its toll. While they were running, the girl asked him, "Is he filming her too?" The guy turned his head at her and said that if she was shy, he could do a mosaic on her face so no one would recognize her. Don't worry about it. They were approaching the monster, who had his back turned to them. It was not the most pleasant scent, and it growled with anger. The monster had a smile on his face for some reason. He didn't notice one of the test subjects approaching him. He was going about his business and didn't even think that there might be an obstacle in his way. Hong jumped up and hit the monster with his weighty fist as hard as he could. A crunch was heard, and the monster's head turned in the opposite direction, with the monster spitting out a pair of its teeth. The guy was incredibly strong. Even against such a huge monster, he felt quite confident. The monster spat out blood along with a few teeth. Han Bayol put his hand forward and prepared to use the spell. They all needed to kill him together. If they grouped their forces together, they would have a good chance at victory. The ogre continued to smile. He sensed in these little ones an easy prey, and was now getting into the excitement, and was not going to back down. The monster got down on one knee from this blow, but didn't fall down. It seemed to be only a small kick for his thick skin. It was as if the monster was getting ready to jump. Now, if he jumped, the guys would have a tough time. The monster prepared himself, tensed his whole body, and stepped so hard on the ground that it sagged under his heavy stride. Now, yes, he's going to jump, so let's get ready. Shion saw all of this and appeared literally under his foot. The girl swung her dagger, and with a sharp movement, she made a slash. She hit the target. The monster began to stagger and lost its balance. The monster fell to the ground and was immobilized for a brief moment. The monster fell to the ground and was immobilized for a brief moment. There was a rumble, and a second later, the ogre was on the ground. Keel tensed all his muscles to use his strongest spell. His body felt like it was covered in magic. Magical symbols began to pop up around him, and a barrage of spells was about to fall on the monster. As it happened, ice shards began to fly out of the magic circles and headed straight for the monster. The guys hoped to finish it off quickly and then deal with the others. There were ogres, and it posed a very strong danger. The monster regained its balance and began to rise. It seemed to be an unexpected blow to him. The monster was too slow to counter them all. He didn't have time to realize anything as ice shards flew at him. After a second, he felt the razor-sharp shards pierce into his flesh. His mouth bled, the monster wheezed, and began to slump on his side. He didn't have time to do anything. The monster was too slow to assess the situation. He fell to his knees again with a loud sound, and was now completely defenseless. There were 3 ice shards sticking out of his chest and embedded into his skin. Not even his hard flesh could withstand such a strong spell. He was on the ground, breathing heavily. The guys froze for a second and waited for the continuation. Perhaps it was only a deceptive maneuver. The ogre was breathing heavily. He was spitting out clots of blood from his mouth. He didn't seem to be as threatening after such an attack. However, he was still alive, which was a problem. He would be able to heal his wounds in principle. Hong stood in front of everyone and prepared his fists to finish off the monster. He was also surprised that the monster was moving. After this attack, the guy stood there for a few more minutes and tried to gather his thoughts. He needed to put all his strength into the blow. Suddenly, a whistling sound was heard. The air began to be cut by a spell-like fire arrow. It was approaching the monster at an incredible speed, so large that it seemed almost impossible to even see it. The monster had no time to react, and the arrow hit it in the neck. The monster wheezed and died instantly. A large cut appeared at the place of the hit. It was a fatal killing blow, now one less ogre. The monster let out a death rattle and began to fall to the ground. It had to answer to the sides so that no one would be crushed by such a large carcass. There were still shards of shrapnel sticking out of its chest. A second later, the defeated monster fell to the ground with a loud sound. Well, -1. The guys stood at a fairly safe distance, still afraid to get a little closer. Who knew that this monster was already dead? Everyone turned around at the protagonist and looked at him in surprise. Hansong looked at them with the same surprised look. There was a fire sphere near him, which was probably where the fire jet had come from. The guy didn't say anything. Everyone looked at him with incredible surprise. No one expected that he would be able to finish off the monster with a single shot. However, it was quite a joyous event. Actually, his limit was 2 throws. but he boosted his strength 4 throws and finished him off. Not bad, but the boy had no strength left, and the ogres weren't getting any smaller. He scratched his head. He was wrong to do that. Now he would have to save his strength for the rest of the battle, unless he wanted to die. His magical powers were still not enough to fully fight. He scratched his head, which was starting to hurt. He suddenly saw the way the others were looking at him. He knew they were surprised, of course, but there was no need to look at him like he'd ruined something for them. He even felt a little scared. Suddenly, he saw through their backs as the rest of the ogres approached. He warned the boys to get out of here immediately, and he needed to take a break to recover a little. This blow had taken too much strength. The guys immediately obeyed him and turned around and ran to fight the rest of the monsters. The guy only looked at them. They are quite strong characters, of course. The protagonist is no match for them, even if he has been training for so long. However, his strength was that so far there was no character who was ready to deliver the final blow. And his magic is actually limited, so he needs to allocate his resources wisely so he doesn't die here. He opened a system store. It was necessary to stock up on potions, or at least equipment to increase his stamina. Otherwise, he would just become a burden. It was urgent to find something to replenish the missing parameters of health and magic power. He began to search diligently for the item he needed, and finally found it. The purchase is complete. They spent points and purchased a cube with abilities. In the boy's hands was a small cube, or rather a yellow diamond, a merchant's ability. If there was a skill he could use right now, that would be nice. He called his flying friend over and told her to get a closer shot of it. The drone buzzed closer and set its cameras to take a closer look. In the boy's hands was a cube, for it was a real discovery. It shone in his hands like a little ray of sunshine, unlocking the first ability. The cube began to glow even stronger, filling the entire space with its bright yellow light. The boy looked at it hopefully, wishing that he could use the ability right now. He looked at his drone. He really wanted everything to work out as he planned. He had a lot of luck points. He hoped it wouldn't let him down this time. The cube began to glow stronger and stronger. It literally levitated over the guy's palm and prepared to spew out the ability. Its light flared up gloriously like a flame. The guy's heart froze for a second. He was still waiting for the ability to appear. He really wanted it to be of any use at all. The events have moved to the Sword of Dawn Guild's base of operations, one of the 10 Korean guilds with the strongest players. The man was sitting in front of a monitor that had many cameras on it, filming every corner of the academy. Suddenly, the man called out to the supervisor and said that there was a call for help from the academy. Behind him stood a man with glasses, most likely the supervisor. He walked closer and adjusted his glasses. It was the leader, Han Sang-gyun, a middle-aged man. He looked at the screen with surprise and asked, "Ogres appeared together with the trolls. Strange." He ordered a rescue team and a couple of high-ranked guys to be sent there. We had to help the newcomers. The subordinate replied that all the high-ranking players that can be sent right now are in the province in Seoul. The man replied to contact Busan and have them use the warp gate. The subordinate immediately made a request for help. The manager stood behind him and thought, "This will take at least minutes. The ogres will do a lot of damage in that time. We need to speed things up." 2 B teachers and ogres. If they don't get help from the candidates, things could come to a tragedy. The man is visibly tense. It didn't happen often, and this was an out-of-state emergency. The man himself did not know how many students with experience could help the situation. The situation was heating up. The man looked at the screens where all of the above was happening. There were several people fighting. Suddenly the man saw something that interested and surprised him. What, 4 candidates? The man would take a closer look and fix his glasses. The subordinate responded that there were 5 people there. However, the supervisor had only seen 4 so far. Suddenly, a woman appeared literally out of nowhere next to the man, who also began to watch intently what was happening on the screens. The manager asked what she was doing here. After all, she had the day off today. The girl replied in a calm voice that it was nothing special. She was looking through the list of locations. The girl was looking at the screens carefully, watching everything that was going on. She was looking at the list of locations from which the request for help had come. There was just one thing. The girl looked to be about years old. Her name was Song Ah-young. She was the commander of the special unit of the Dawn Ball Guild. She looked at the screen with a concerned look. It was just that her little sister was there, and so she immediately came to the rescue. The supervisor was shocked by this news, and he asked again, as if he didn't believe the words. The situation seemed to be getting even more heated. The man immediately turned his gaze to the other monitors and saw a girl who looked suspiciously like the squad leader, most likely her sister. The girl was running as fast as she could. Young folded her arms on her chest and wondered, but why is she chasing after that monster? She only likes dueling with humans, right? It wasn't like her. The girl thought for a moment. The supervisor looked at her and said that during training she was saying not to be pitied. Now she was worried? The woman replied that there was training then. That's why she said that, because she realized that nothing bad could happen then. The woman watched the screen where her little sister was. She knew very well that this girl wasn't the kind of girl who liked to get into hard fights, certainly not the kind of girl who would fight in good faith. She grabbed her head, but what made her go straight there to ask for a sign where she was going? What an idiot! It looked like the girl was starting to get angry. She literally didn't recognize her sister. What had caused her to change so drastically? The supervisor looked at her with an understanding look. He understood that she was worried about her sister, but there was a but. The woman asked exasperatedly, "What else?" The staff can hear everything. Let her choose her expression. The girl, without the slightest shame, said that the manager did not meddle in his business. The man was literally stunned by this treatment and said that she has not changed a bit. All the same, arrogant. She looked even closer and noticed one of the students fighting a monster with his bare hands. The superintendent replied that the thing about this guy was that he was very physically strong, looking funny from the outside. They kept watching everyone and noticed that Boel had pretty good skills in telekinesis. The guy was pretty good at fighting at a distance. It was like they were watching everyone and picking out the best. Gil Sung-hyun. Seong-hyun seems to be able to make good double throws, not a bad skill for a beginner. His magic technique is limited, but he has plenty of magic power, and he's keeping a pretty cool head. They continued to watch. The situation stopped getting more and more interesting. Suddenly, something caught their eyes that surprised them not a little. The principal looked forward and pointed his finger at one of the participants. Goosebumps ran down his back at what he saw. Who is this guy? Something unforeseen has come up on the screen. A rookie who was able to create a quadruple power throw. Well, show him his data. The girl was surprised. She started flipping through his resume. In the practical class, he had placed first. Points? I think that was the first time she had ever seen a score like that. She was still standing there staring at the guy's results, and still couldn't believe that such a thing was even possible in their academy. The director continued to watch. The fact that the guy managed to shoot a video on the quadcopter made him smile. The girl said that he was pretty good, since he had such an ability, and was able to fight the monster so easily. The director grinned and said cheerfully that he thought these guys could hold out until the rescue team came if they were doing so well so far. Suddenly, they saw Han Song's candidate going to use the cube ability. It was the first time they had seen such a thing on a test. This guy seemed like an extremely interesting specimen. They would have to take a closer look at him. Young watched it with a steady gaze. Disclosure of ability, talents, and aptitudes, and also the physical data all have to match. And only then could he manage to get a normal ability. However, what the girl saw made her open her mouth in surprise. This was the first time she had ever seen someone act spontaneously like this. Her eyes widened, and her mouth opened in surprise. Even the director himself was surprised by this turn of events. They stood there for a couple of seconds and just looked at what was happening on the screens in silence. The principal smirked. So this kid's specialty is not magic, but sword. So what did he just see? The headmaster looked at it with a surprised look, as if it was the first time he had seen something like that in his career. The girl watched all of this with a steady gaze. The revealed ability of a sword technique. There was simply no way such a thing could happen. The girl tried to understand something, but it seemed to be the first time she had encountered such a beginner. She immediately swung her hand and punched the director in the shoulder, telling him to get in touch with the recruitment center right away. They had to take this one. The director fixed his glasses and said he would try to talk to them. But with that kind of ability, would this guy come to them? Something about the director was too doubtful that the guy would want to cooperate with them. Even though they're in the top 10, they're only ranked 7th. The girl scratched her head and seemed to realize, what a devil. She remembered. So we need to pick this guy up right now. A place. That's not an indicator. She continued to stare at the screen where the fight was taking place. The newcomer, who had suddenly shown himself to be so good, was swinging a sword, and where did he get such abilities? She couldn't understand how the guy had gotten here in the first place. At the sight of the fight, bright flashes began to sparkle. The sun was about to come out. The battle was very fierce, but this was the first time the guys were facing such difficulties. They had to deal with these ogres. Han-sung, glancing at his skill plate, his luck score was points. That's not bad. His luck is holding at the same level, so it should work out. He should get the skill he wants. It's just important not to overdo it. He would be able to get an ability that he could use right away. Immediately, a sword materialized in his hands, which he intended to use to slash the ogre. Well, we'll have to try it. The guy swung his sword, and there was a metallic clang. Song Ziyan was fighting monsters, although she had previously only used stealthy attacks. The girl jumped up and attacked the monster from the back. Her ability to become a shadow played to her advantage, and she moved almost unnoticed by the monsters. Ogre turned to her at the last moment, but it seemed to be too late. There was nothing the monster could do. Its clumsy body couldn't dodge such a lightning-fast attack. Han-sung swung his sword and in a single leap approached the monster. His sword pierced straight through its neck, and the sound of flesh being torn apart. The monster took hold of his wounded shoulder and began to wheeze in pain. However, the guy immediately bounced away from him. A huge cut appeared on his shoulder. Great, but that's still not enough to take down such a monster alone. If he reacts immediately, he'll have the strength and speed to deliver the desired blow. Not bad. Not bad. He certainly can't compare to Hun, but he'll have to try his best. Strengthening physical abilities. Description: strengthens the physical abilities of the user skill, is proportional to the points of physical magic and mental strength. The more the player uses his physical abilities, the faster the skill grows. Just the right skill came out. Aim. Now, he could easily defeat this monster alone. The guy swung his sword and approached the monster in one great leap. It's not bad that his luck is at this level. Now, he would be able to deal with it with ease. As soon as he struck the ogre with such a crushing blow, the beast fell to the ground with a thud. Now, he was finally and irrevocably dead. The guys stood in front of the body of the defeated monster and still couldn't believe that they had succeeded. The emergency quest had been completed. The training quest was also completed, rewarding 2 random potion chests, mid-level popularity points. Strange luck was activated. An additional popularity points. User Li Han-sung's popularity skyrocketed. He receives popularity points. New achievement. Showing magical power increases due to an increase in magic power utilization. Physical strength increase due to the increased use of physical strength. The mastery of the skill, magical enhancement skill, has increased dramatically. Mastery of the skill physical enhancement has increased dramatically. Han-sung hid his sword and realized that they hadn't lost anyone and had succeeded in their mission. It was dangerous, but the reward was worth it. Not bad, his luck had worked just right after all. He opened the skill icon and began to choose what to pump next. Should he open the random chest of mid-level potions right away? There would be a potion to boost stats. Just what you need. Low-level charm potion. Increases charm scores by points daily for a total of points if charm scores are below. The user gains 1 additional point. Potion of physical growth provides an increase in muscle strength, health agility, health and speed. Wow, so it could increase enchantment by points. The guy was holding a small vial of the potion with both hands. He grabbed it so hard, it looks like he might break it. They won't say he's a freak anymore. He's so hurt. The guy literally almost cried with happiness. Could it be that his luck has turned around? Suddenly, a mechanical drone flew up to him. He reported that his YouTube channel was growing. The guy looked at him with surprise. Really? Really? Drone nodded. Yes, the viewers have a good response to his videos, which increases his popularity in the local network. Indeed, Sergey's appearance on the channel seems to have played a role. His video of him fighting Sergey already had likes. He clutched the potion in his hand. After a certain amount of growth, one could raise the level of popularity using various media. He was right to immediately start posting videos on YouTube. That's what the pursuit of popularity is all about. Everything is going exactly according to plan. The boy was incredibly pleased with his find. He was holding the potion in his hands, and he would succeed. He was already fully confident that he would soon be able to level up to a sufficient level. The sky of the black land, where there is no sun anymore, has turned ashy. In the center of this land is the Devil's Tower. Everywhere there are battles between humans and monsters. In order to kill the monster, you must become a monster yourself. They had to stop being human, deny everything human, and turn into monsters like them to survive. Since then, they've given their souls to become monsters. The teacher was explaining to the students the history of monsters. This is the place that Africa has now become. They, as future heroes, should definitely know about this place. The teacher talked about it with great enthusiasm. Suddenly, one of the students raised his hand and asked to whom they had sold their souls. The teacher looked up and said, "Deities?" Or someone like that question. It seems yes, that's what it was. The woman nodded her head. That was correct. They had sold their souls and become monsters like these. Would they too have to make a pact with these creatures later on? The woman nodded her head again. Yes, the same fate awaited them. Fear not, however, contract and subordination are different things. A contract implies a mutually beneficial transaction. It is possible to contract with these creatures. When they reach a certain level with achievements, they will be able to sign a contract and become even stronger. The girl pointed at her hand. Suddenly, the woman raised her finger, and contracting to survive there would not be possible. They would need to contract them more to become stronger warriors. The girl spoke about it completely seriously, as if it was a matter of course. A man with a huge, weighty hammer fought several dozen gargoyles that came at him from different directions. They attacked the man again and again, but he obeyed his survival instinct and fought them off with incredible strength. But still, his physical and magical strength was not enough to withstand so many monsters, and one of them still managed to hit him right in the back. The man died in great suffering. Charles covered her mouth with her hand to keep from screaming. It seemed to be the first time in her life that she had ever seen such cruelty. It was unusual for her to see someone die in such agony. The boy was also a bit shocked, but he realized that sooner or later he would have to face such monsters. He had trained all these years for a reason after all, and would continue to train on his way to becoming a hero. The female teacher lowered her head, and in a serious and yet a little sad voice said that this is the reality of the Black Earth, so they must be prepared for it. It is necessary to prepare well while they are in the walls of this academy, because here they are, provided with all the necessary knowledge and practical skills for survival. Suddenly, she saw Han Song looking rather calm compared to the other students. Indeed, the guy was sitting calmly at his desk, with his hands folded in front of him, as if he was not being shown footage of the gruesome realities of this world, but rather what kind of documentary it was. While the other students grabbed their heads and now and then shrieked in surprise, the guy was absolutely calm. Han Song didn't want to draw attention to himself, but he seemed to do it best. I mean, they're just high schoolers and he's been there many times before, so he doesn't care about the information. It just doesn't shock him. However, it's not like he couldn't say everything straight to his face, he answered more evasively. After all, they're hero candidates, and they should be prepared for such things. That's why he's acting calm enough. Why would he cry? The woman was surprised by such words, but nodded her head affirmatively. Those were the right words. It was obvious that the guy was ready for any difficulties. Okay, he did the right thing after all. However, the guy was still hesitant. It was the perfect answer, or wasn't it? He thought for a moment. Here, they are all just students. Here are people who are preparing to become heroes. For now, they are candidates, but soon they will be the people who will face these horrible monsters head-on. Sai Young sat next to him and looked at the guy. If they avoid places like this, they won't be able to become heroes. The girl even tensed up a bit. Even she, who had dealt with assassinations all her life, was now a bit shaken by how calmly the guy was talking about it. At this point, the kid seemed to realize he was drawing unwanted attention to himself. Why is she staring at him like that? You can't meet her gaze. He immediately looked away so he wouldn't meet her gaze. That was the end of the lesson. The boys went to their rooms to get some rest. We have to be careful with her. If he aroused suspicion, the girl wouldn't leave him alone. She had been acting strange lately. After that, the guy went to the cafeteria. It was a little crowded, which pleased him. You could at least a little rest. The day was a little difficult, and the battle with these monsters, then at the lesson, attracted unnecessary attention to himself. My head was spinning with some bullshit. I had to get my thoughts in order. He ordered himself a mug of coffee, loudly placing it on the table. The guy sat down next to it. He sighed heavily in a small chair. too much to do for him. He was not used to his role in the world. He was used to being an ordinary kid who played video games, edited videos, and did ordinary things. But here, he had to fight a monster. Besides, he's been getting a lot of attention lately. Video editing, coaching, running a YouTube channel, and discover new supernatural abilities. The guy specifically tired of all this. For a second, he wanted to go back to his small and unremarkable life so that he, again, was an ordinary man. The guy sat down comfortably and started to look in front of him, but he could not relax because in this world, it is not encouraged. The boy sat down and looked at his surroundings. Suddenly, a strange rustling sound came from his ear, and he immediately turned his head there. The first thing he saw was the silky white hair that ran down to the shoulders of a pretty girl. The first thing he saw was the silky white hair that came down to the shoulders of a pretty girl. Yes, it was just as he thought. It was Charles, it seems. This girl was not at all socialized and was very afraid to interact with people. She was holding on to her little purse over her shoulder and twirling her head around as if it were a rescue. But why come to the cafe if you're afraid of people? The guy noticed her and waved his hand, inviting her to sit with him. She came closer to him. He had a peaceful look on his face, happy to see the girl, apparently, another chance to get closer to her and gain a new ally. The girl would pour out and timidly approached him. She said hello and pushed back a chair to sit down. They say hello to each other all the time, but it still feels a little awkward, like they're some kind of lovers who are trying not to show their relationship to the public. What's with the associations? Who came up with that? As soon as the girl sat down next to him, the guy asked her what she would like. Charles waved her hands as usual and started to refuse. She was terribly embarrassed when I gave her something to eat, and in general, she found it very difficult to interact with people. But then, the guy hit a nerve. How about some hot chocolate? And then, it was like the girl was asking for it. Hot chocolate? Yeah, he knew this girl well from his time in the game. She was too insecure, so she thought she had less skills compared to the others. However, that wasn't the case at all. They were sitting across from each other, drinking hot chocolate. The girl asked, "By the way, which dungeon does he propose to go to?" The guy was sitting in front of her, completely relaxed and thinking about something. He looked over at the girl, who was looking at him shyly and holding a mug of hot chocolate. He pondered, if he gave her the cube for nothing, she would take it kind of in stride due to her extremely cautious nature. He planned to use these facts. Just befriend her and grow up. He smiled his wide, beaming smile. He's not going to go to the usual dungeons. Naturally, it wasn't that simple. He was up to something again. That's if it all backfired on him. Then he would start whining again. The guy put the mug of hot chocolate on the table loudly and started talking. He wasn't going to go to the usual dungeons, and he could hear the mystery in his voice. He was trying his best to interest the girl. Yes, she was a great ally, but now he needed to have a heart-to-heart talk with her. He made himself even more comfortable and said he'd found something. He took the mug of hot chocolate again and sipped loudly. It looked like he might be able to get the girl interested. It's a hidden dungeon with a cube. He made a face like he was talking about some universal conspiracy than a simple dungeon. With all his might, the guy was trying to get the girl's attention, to somehow be an ally to you. It seemed to work, and Charles started listening even harder. Really? Someone her dungeon? She read both consternation and interest at the same time. The girl was being overly cautious. It seemed the guy had overdone it a bit. He continued to sit in his chair, holding his mug of hot chocolate. He seemed to have hit the right spot, and now he spoke in a kind of ingratiating, mysterious voice, the way he used to tell bedtime stories to children. Yes, a hidden dungeon, he repeated, and continued to explain his plan. There were people walking around, but they didn't seem to care about the two students who were sitting at one of the tables and discussing something heatedly. The girl seemed interested, but at the same time, a little scared. So he wasn't talking about regular dungeons? She even put the mug of chocolate back down. The guy folded his hands in front of him and said that he could go to a normal dungeon alone. The girl asked in a frightened, trembling voice, "Why does he want her?" Hansong said, "If they joined forces, it would be beneficial to both of them. Damn, this guy knows how to make deals." He looked at the girl with an inquisitive look and smiled. "First of all, as he said, there is a cube ability and they will sweep the dungeons where the cube is and split it in half afterward." The guy crunched his knuckles that he was fully prepared. He opened his hands and said he wasn't going to take everything. He only wanted the right cubes and would distribute the rest to his allies. The girl thought about it. The offer was certainly very tempting. She wanted to upgrade her abilities or even get new ones. She didn't seem to have any doubts at all. After all, the guy could persuade. The girl thought for a comparatively short time. She immediately asked, and agreed. Then she's certainly better off. What are the odds of clearing the dungeon, even if she can? But the girl didn't seem to be able to finish her sentence. Si Young appeared out of nowhere in her own way. She literally appeared from behind the girl and said she was coming with them. Poor Charles was scared to death. She didn't expect anyone to be watching them at all, but the girl seemed determined. The boy didn't seem particularly pleased that this girl had come to them. She said hello and waved. The girl stood in front of them in good spirits, something that was very, very rare to see. A smile glistened on her face. The girl seemed ready for anything. How did she even find them? Why had she come here in the first place? She continued to smile, and it was as if nothing was happening. Her eyes sparkled with some sort of mischievousness. Obviously, she was up to something. As usual, she shows up at just the right moment. In quotation marks, of course. The girl waved her hands and said that she just came to rest. Why else do people go to the cafe? Lying, she got frankly bad. The girl tried to bring herself naturally, but looking at her usual behavior was difficult to say what she now wants. Han sung thoughtfully. He crunched his knuckles from the exertion. She goes to a cafe? To relax. Looking at how the girl passes the test and spends her leisure time, he was more willing to believe that the moon was singing to the earth than this girl coming to the cafe to rest. It's very illogical and abnormal, but if he touched her, he would die immediately. He realized that he was in even more danger now than fighting the ogre. The girl must have noticed the confusion on his face and looked at him intently. Okay, can she step back? They're talking to me. The girl looked at him with an angry look. Was he chasing her away? Yes. The guy said it too seriously. Too seriously. I think you're walking on very thin ice, kid. The girl started thinking out loud and suggested maybe killing his begging sign. She didn't even realize what she said. The boy asked if he had heard everything. She looked at him with such disdain, as if he had ruined her life. She realized the guy I heard her and waved me off. It's okay. Let them chat further. Charles sat next to her and glanced fearfully in the direction of the girl. Indeed, there was nothing to be afraid of. Now this girl was ready to kill half of the cafe if something will not suit her. Well, she's not leaving. Well, either way, they're going to continue the conversation. The guy said, either way, he'll get to the point. Not only can he help her, it's also a chance to find a club. The girl asked, what happens if they want to join the same club? The boy thought, it all depends on how the circumstances turn out. What kind of club will be caught? They can agree on this on the spot, so that there will be no trouble later. Charles cheered up. She wanted to ask something, but all this time she couldn't. If she would even be able to clear the dungeon with their current level of the begging sign ability, it seemed to worry the girl, because she realized how weak they were now. And now she had to at least pump up her skills. However, the kid said she didn't have to worry about that, the level of difficulty he was taking on. Even on his own you can do it, though it will take a very long time. There didn't seem to be a shadow of doubt on his face about his plans. He smiled, as if he was talking about going to the movie theater. The girl sighed heavily. She could hardly believe that they would be able to clear this dungeon after all. Still, she preferred to agree. Then he suggested that they join forces to clear it faster. Shi Young had been standing next to them the whole time and said that it would be perfect with her. Charlie only saw her now and turned her gaze to her. All this time, she had been standing so quietly that she was practically invisible. Han Song asked her if she was sure that she wanted to ask for it. His gaze clearly showed that he was not very happy with this girl's presence around him. However, she didn't seem to care at all. She nodded her head and replied that of course she wanted to. What kind of question was that? She's a murderer after all. He thought about it, of course. They could clear the dungeons much faster together, and she was in 8th place. What if she could be his ally at the same time? It sounds crazy considering her character and her glory, but what the hell, it's a begging sign. It would also be pretty good to get ready for the main storyline, which by the way was ending soon, and that was a problem. Anyway, and he was only interested in one club. He suddenly thought that this was not a bad deal. This girl, Although this girl was hot-tempered, yes, and also a murderer, yes, and basically made half of the academy creepy, but it was not a bad deal. At this time, the girl sat next to them and folded her hands in a lock in front of her, watching and waiting for the final decision. Still, the guy made a decision. Okay, they'll go together, but first, we need to discuss the plan. He took a small piece of paper out of his pocket and put it between the boys. From what the girls saw, they slightly started to shiver with fear. Even Si Yeon was frightened. It was the first time they had seen such valuable papers in front of them. The piece of paper was literally glowing, indicating that it was quite valuable. But even that was still putting it mildly. Han Song sat in front of them and smiled, let them check. There wasn't a trace of doubt on his face, as if that was the way it should be. The girls looked at him with surprised and at the same time frightened eyes. Charles asked, "Is he serious?" Se-young told him not to show such valuable papers in a place like this, or else it gets scary. She's scared? I can't believe it. That girl can scare anyone. In front of them lay a small, standard A piece of paper. It was a magical non-disclosure agreement. Was it really necessary? The girls were still looking at this document with some disbelief and fear. All that was required was their signatures. Hansong smiled and said, not that he didn't trust them, but still, he didn't want their conversation to be recognized by anyone. Someone extra, someone who might interfere with their operations. Caution was never a bad thing. The girls looked at the contract with different emotions. Charles was interested, and at the same time a little wary. It was about a very serious trip. Si-young frowned. She didn't seem to trust all these papers. Han Byul stood in the locker room and wiped his face with some cloth. He was still pondering. From the looks of it, the guy was worried about something, or even scared. It was hard to see him in such a state. He was still thinking back to today's lecture, where the rookie acted like he was an ex-military man. Because we're all hero candidates. Those words wouldn't leave the kid's head. He still couldn't get Han Song's calmness, with which he said that phrase out of his mind. It felt like the guy had already known about it all beforehand. But how was that even possible? Had he already been there before? Han Byul, among the newcomers, there is one who knows about the Black Earth. From the looks of it, it's that rookie. What the hell? His mind was still blank, although the overall picture was depressing. Suddenly, he bumped into one of the students. He asked Bull, "Is he leaving already?" The guy turned his head to him and asked, "What?" He just needed to think. What about him? The guy looked like he was out of his mind. Suddenly, the students took out a small quadricopter from their pocket. It was much smaller than the one Han Sung had. He said that he too wanted to shoot a video for video hosting. Byul asked, "Is it because of the freshman?" The student responded that it was because of him. It seems like an interesting class. He said it with such enthusiasm as if it was his life's work. The boy said he just had no words for it. He sighed heavily. He waved his hand and said let him try it if it worked. The student said goodbye to him and ran off somewhere else. The guy was left alone in the empty hallway and went about his business. Han Song standing outside, even though there was a strong wind, to raise the level by means of an achievement need a lot of popularity. It's a good way to tell other people about yourself. Well, that's not bad. Han Byul was walking down the corridor, thinking, what if this newcomer is the child of the Black Earth? Then, it would be a very interesting turn of events. The boy couldn't get over this thought. He couldn't stop thinking about this newcomer. The children of the people of Black Earth who are subject to evil may also begin to be subject to that evil. It's like a time bomb, but there's little chance of it going off. Until they return to the Black Earth again, or until this evil goes beyond the African mainland. Is this newcomer, but what if he refreshes Ding Hong's memories? The guy kept walking somewhere, not even sure where, and pondering. It was as if he did not see anyone around him. He stopped suddenly and looked up, before something irreparable happened. He had to do something. Something had to be done. A chill ran down the boy's back. If he couldn't do this, he was in trouble. We need to prevent tragedy. The magic contract was still lying on the table. The power of the contract is absolute. A person has no right to tell anyone the truth. From this magical glow, you could physically feel it moving. It was literally floating above the ground. If a person tells someone, it's in the case of disclosure, they lose their memories of the content of the conversation forever. A kind of dementia. The girls sat across from Han Seong and were still hesitant to sign the contract. Therefore, from the moment a person signed the contract, he was obliged to keep the secret of the skills he had learned. It was a rule that could not be broken under any circumstances. Naturally, he couldn't tell them about all the effects of the skills. He turned to Charlie, a girl he had high hopes for, as she seemed to be the best ally he had. He said that the girl would soon be able to discover one unique ability if she practiced enough. Charles asked in amazement, "Really? It's not a lie, is it?" She was very happy about this fact. Her eyes lit up with joy. The boy calmed her down and told her not to worry. It was true. The girl sighed heavily and looked at the boy as if relieved and hopeful. Shi-young squinted her eyes and asked, "What about her? Does she have something too?" The girl looked at all this with hope and some skepticism. After all, she didn't fully trust this kid. Hansong told her to wait for a moment and looked at the table with his information. What he saw shocked him. Muscular strength, magical strength, speed, mental strength, agility, intelligence, health, enchantment, sense, luck, potency out of 1,000. Unique skills, shadow travel, thought acceleration not revealed, special skills, black spike not revealed, and some other weird skill that was labeled with asterisks, by the way, also not revealed, killing features. The path of the Dark King is not revealed, and another skill also marked with asterisks, also not revealed. How can murder be a feature? Right now, you can only unlock thought acceleration. The guy replied that she had something too, but needed training quite hard, by the way. As soon as the girl heard that, she got excited. She literally glowed with happiness. I guess it was too important to her. Good thing she's happy. Less chance of this guy getting killed. A dangerous friend, after all. He chose himself. Or he didn't choose himself. Hansong shifted his gaze to Charles, but she did the opposite. The girl. Though the girl seemed to be pleased with her, it gave her new ground to think about. She seemed to be pushing herself even harder. It was obvious from the girl that she was very worried. From the moment she found out that she had a hidden skill, she immediately stopped talking and started looking in front of her. She's not confident in herself, and to be honest, she's inferior to Song Si-yeon. The girl folded her hands in front of her and tried to get her thoughts in order. She's probably worried about whether she'll be able to handle it, but it seems like she shouldn't worry. With a team like this, their chances are better. All right, I've got to do something to cheer her up. She was finally able to get her thoughts in order and said that it was a good reward. What should they do in such a case? Song Si-yeon still couldn't get excited about the fact that she had a hidden skill that she had just discovered. The girl was acting like a child. No wonder she has an intelligence of points. As soon as she heard, she immediately calmed down and settled back into her seat. She was so excited. And now the harsh reality awaited her. Well, the guy really didn't want to upset them. Charles did all the business beside her, still peering at the girl fearfully. The boy made a serious voice and said that now he wanted to ask them something. He paused for a moment, took a breath of air, as if to collect his thoughts. At last, he found the right words and fired them like cannons. He's asking us to be his allies and stop the world from collapsing. The guy said it so loud, I think the whole cafeteria heard it. What an idiot. Who taught him how to be a conspirator? His throat was dry after that heartfelt speech, and he exhaled heavily. His mind was racing. But no, he couldn't say that to them, even though it was true. What are you thinking, kid? What are you thinking? How are you going to tell them? He spread his hands and said in a calm voice that he would like them to join his management company in the future. Well, he's not forcing them. Wow, that's pretty cool. That's a good point. How are you going to start a management company? But it would be better if they become stronger after going through this dungeon. The girls looked at him with eyes full of seriousness. Even Si-yeon calmed down and listened attentively. Charles opened her eyes in surprise, although it was obvious from the girl's expression that she was very worried. It's a responsibility after all, she asked with surprise and interest. So when he graduated from the academy, he would be in charge of maintaining the level of heroes? A management company, that sounds very pathetic. Girl, you should know what kind of venture you're getting into. Han-sung lied and didn't blush. That's right. He's doing the same thing as the other companies that handle the heroes' personal activity planning, solving their legal problems and so on. He loaded them up with information. Shi-young sat on the chair and tried to comprehend what she had heard. To be honest, helping others was more convenient than doing her own work. Besides, she had already learned about the skill she was going to develop. It sounded pretty convincing. So, what else would she be thinking about? The girl began to run her eyes around. She still couldn't make up her mind. It was a rather responsible and serious decision that needed to be thought about, and they were required to make a decision instantly. Charlie loaded up again. She missed her eyes and tried to get her thoughts in order. The girl, by all appearances, was worried. Her insecurity was taking its toll, and now she couldn't make a decision normally, though she inwardly really wanted to grow up just a little. Yes, the guy really wished inside himself that they would join his management company after all, but even if they refuse now, that's okay too. But even if they say no, that's okay. I think he was trying to convince himself that it was okay. So that was enough information for now. He moved away from the table and prepared to get up. They could take their time deciding. He would give them time to think. Si Yan got up from her seat. No way. She wasn't used to receiving and getting away with it, so she was in the game. The girl's voice was incredibly confident, but that's what you'd expect from her. She's an adventurous girl who will take on any adventure. Charles seemed to agree as well. The girl raised her hand, and stammering, but still her fear said she agreed too. The boy repeated that he didn't want to force them, so let this decision not be forced. He smiled and waved his hand. They still had to finish the academy they had just started. They could make a decision later, who knows? Things could still change drastically. He marveled at how quickly these girls had agreed to his proposal. In principle, they could have said no in a heartbeat, or at least thought about it. But he seemed to have underestimated them. And he seemed to have forgotten the most important thing. The girls frowned, and even moved closer to him so they could hear him better. He put his hand to his chest and said that if it was easier for them, let them think they were helping a friend. He had that smile on his face again. That sneaky devil. He knew how to talk his way out of it. And now he had everything he wanted. Charlie repeated in surprise. Helping a friend? Chi-Yon seemed to be looking at him with some disbelief now. It would be more effective if he instilled a sense of obligation in them. It would be funky. Then you could better manipulate their feelings to get what you want. You're the real manipulator. Chi-Yon frowned and said, then you can't kill. The girl seemed to be upset by that fact. Of course, she's a hereditary killer. She lives for it. What did he expect when he offered her such a venture? Boy, what did she say? The girl shook her head and said she didn't say anything. This was the end of their secret conversation. Well, the guy had made his final decision. Better talk about the dungeon then. He leaned back in his chair again and began his story. Not a single unnecessary person was to know about this secret conversation. Soon, the boy returned to the academy and headed for the training room. He entered a large, spacious room. Well, the deed was done. He gave them the information. Next week, it would be left to go into the dungeon. At this rate, he would grow much faster than planned, but it was for the best. And his rate of growth even frightened him. The guy sighed heavily. He's so busy he doesn't even have time to sit down and rest, but his life depends on it. Suddenly, someone called out to him. The guy turned his head back. Who could it be? The voice seemed very familiar to him. It was his old acquaintance Sergei. The guy waved at him and greeted him warmly. He had an expression of extreme satisfaction on his face. Hansong asked him, "Is he going to practice again?" The boy nodded and replied that naturally so, he practiced every chance he got. Hansung thought about it. After last time, he was not upset. After all, what a positive guy, a positive quality. He does not know how to give up. Sergei said that he had watched his video times. Han replied that he had seen his commentary. Sergei liked it and was able to look at himself from the outside. After all, you need to gain experience. The guys picked up the wooden sticks again and prepared for another sparring session. Sergei said that he was able to draw conclusions from the revised material and work a little on his mistakes, although not completely, but he managed to improve his technique a little. The boy asked him if he wanted to train with him again. Han smiled and thought that if Sergei trusted him, that was a good sign. I'll have a hard time getting him as my ally. Everything is going according to his plan, perfectly. Han smiled and replied that he didn't have to then. He summoned some quadricopters and continued filming. He filmed literally everything. Suddenly, a stick appeared out of nowhere and swung into the air, hitting one of the quadricopters. What the hell is that? A woman's voice was heard. A large wooden stick immediately descended on the quadcopter and knocked it down with one blow. How annoying. The voice was very annoyed, but who was it? Han turned his head at the voice. As soon as Sergei saw what was happening there, he immediately became frightened. A look of extreme concern appeared on his face. The guy rubbed his head and turned to the girl who stood behind them. The girl's name was Nadia. Looks like they knew each other. What's she doing? She was about their age, had bright red hair, and was dressed in a tracksuit. In her hand, she had the same stick she used to shoot down the quadricopter. The girl looked at them with distrust and even some squeamishness. She fumbled irritably with the broken mechanism and asked who let him use that thing during a fight. The quadricopter still seemed to be serviceable, and thank God the impact didn't seem to be too hard. Han remembered her. It was Nadia, a pretty hot-tempered girl. She looked away and closed her eyes. She seemed to be getting bored with the whole thing. The guy remembered. This girl was a world spearmaster and the daughter of a military entrepreneur. In normal life, it's hard to even just meet her, but here he's standing face to face with her. Pretty funny and ironic at the same time. However, this only applies to normal situations. The guy opened the drone control panel and launched the broken quadcopter. So, you want to try and get a response? Sounds like it could be fun, considering her temper. He reactivated the quadricopter, and the device immediately took off with a loud buzzing sound. As soon as the girl saw it, she jumped aside in fright. She yelped. It seemed she had never seen something like this before, though it was hard to believe. The device began to fly closer and closer to her. The girl stared intently at the funny thing that was rapidly spinning its blades and moving literally on its own. The quadricopter flew close enough to her, even too close. The girl looked at it fearfully. It was the first time she'd ever seen such a thing, and there was squeamishness in her eyes, and some fear. The girl yelled for him to put that thing away now. She swung her stick and tried to shoot down the quadricopter again. However, Han put it away with a deft move, and the quadricopter flew off to the side with a whirring sound. What's the matter? The girl tried her best to catch the annoying thing, but it was too high, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't reach it. Although the quadricopter was mockingly close, it was only necessary to jump up, but as soon as the girl did so, the device flew up even higher. Han watched it all with a smile on his face. He enjoyed teasing her like that. Nadia tried to reach the quadricopter with her hand, but only jumped uselessly. The guy smiled. There was no way she could catch that drone with her hands. She wouldn't be able to reach it. He'd been operating this device for years, so he'd had time to hone his skills. In the end, the girl became furious. She yelled at him, "Is he crazy?" It seems like she was in a bad mood now and was ready to nail him on the spot. What an annoying guy. She grabbed her spear and prepared to attack. Han held onto his wooden sword and prepared to fight back. He walked almost right up to her and looked down at her from above. He was a head taller than the girl, so he could easily see her. She was furious, but when the guy came within that distance, she shivered a little. In a cold and lifeless voice, he turned to her. It was as if he had a change in his face. His voice had made everyone too rough. The guy was unrecognizable. Nadia looked at him with surprised yet frightened eyes. Her inner rage was still raging, but its fervor had cooled a little. The girl was now even a little surprised and frightened. Unexpectedly to himself, Han bent toward her and said she was too noisy. Would she shut her mouth, for goodness sake? The guy looked like he was ready to tear her apart right now. He looked at her with such disdain. Something about that look sent shivers down her spine. She definitely didn't expect to be treated so impertinently, and she got even more angry. What does he allow himself? She couldn't even say anything for a second. Goosebumps ran down her back again. However, the girl came to her senses relatively quickly and became even more angry. What did he just say? A strange aura began to fly near her. The girl became even more furious, however. She was a bit creepy. Khan understood the character of this girl very well. She is very spoiled and ill-mannered, but she is the daughter of an oligarch and has good skills. However, she has one serious flaw. The guy looked down at her without saying a word. Nadia tried to come to her senses, but she did it very badly. The girl was literally shaking with rage and shock. Because of her characteristic herding spirit, she has an increase in stats and a sense of calmness when someone surpasses her in the village. That is, she feels calm in those who try to push her around and mistreat her. In short, she's a masochist. They were facing each other, and it looked like they were about to fight. The girl shook her body and tried to come to her senses, but her peculiarity would not let her calm down. Han stood looking down at her with his calm and soulless gaze. Nadia continued to stand beside him and shiver. She sounds like a masochist, but in reality she just couldn't get rid of it because of her peculiarity. She must have been very frightened when she first experienced anger mixed with the effects of her peculiarity. Indeed, the girl looked scared. Han stood beside her and continued to stare at her with his eyes now closed. She was probably very angry because she had never met anyone so rude to her before, but there was nothing to be done to put her in her place. Someone had to do it. Suddenly, the guy reached out to her and mentally apologized to the girl. After all, he should pretend to the end, no matter how much she didn't want him to. He lightly touched her forehead with his finger. The girl certainly hadn't expected this turn of events, and for a few more minutes, she was in a stupor. She just stared at him with her heated eyes. The girl blushed, either from shame or fear. The guy moved even closer to her, and in a quiet, ingratiating voice asked, "Who gave her permission to touch his camera?" At the same time, the girl looked at him with completely frightened eyes. Anger mixed with fear raged inside her, and she couldn't say a word, just stared at him like a frightened child. She started to tell him to remove his hand immediately. The girl's voice was shaking with fear. She tried to gather her thoughts together, but nothing worked. Fear prevented her from thinking properly. She finally got over herself and slapped him on the arm, yelling for him to remove his hand immediately. The girl was finally able to control herself. Now, she was more like herself. However, the Khan had no thought of stopping. He leaned his finger on her forehead again. The girl certainly did not expect such impudence, and as if frozen for a couple of seconds, she looked at him with eyes full of rage, still holding her hand in front of her. Goosebumps of anger ran down her spine. That's it! He's finished! The girl wanted to tear him apart immediately, as he was starting to get on her nerves. No, that's a weak word. He was starting to naturally piss her off. No one could fight back. She tried to pick up the stick. Well, now she's gonna kill him. She's gonna kill him. The girl looked at him like a bull at a red rag. She wanted to tear the bastard to shreds. However, Han immediately blocked Ya's attempt to swing his stick. The girl could not even raise her spear to hit him. She tried to yank her arm, but the guy held on tight. Nadia looked startled. She couldn't do anything. It was the first time in her life she had ever faced someone so rude and insolent now, and she would just have to accept and admit defeat. Their guns crossed, and there was no way the girl could free her hand. At this time, Han asked caustically, "What's wrong?" The guy's voice sounded even a little creepy. He looked down at her and said in a quiet voice, "Did she want to wave her spear at close range?" She didn't seem to be thinking straight at all. His eyes didn't express anything. He looked at her like a wolf at a sheep he was about to eat. The guy was playing his part, but he was doing it quite convincingly. The girl couldn't fight her feelings anymore. She clenched her teeth and tried to come to her senses, but something kept getting in her way. She closed her eyes, and you could literally hear her teeth cracking with anger. All right, he's got her physically. Now it's just a matter of putting the finishing touches on it. Kill her mentally. He had to kill her. Of course it was brutal, but he had no other choice. Well, if that girl tried to stop him again, he wouldn't be ashamed of his dirty tricks. He stood right in front of her, literally a few steps away, and in a mouthed voice asked, "How is Anton doing?" For a second, there was silence between them. It seemed that even the air began to be saturated with electricity. How much tension there was between them. Sergei, who had been standing behind me all this time and watching everything that was going on, was horrified. A mask of fear appeared on his face. He hadn't expected this. He didn't see everything that was happening, but he realized that something wrong was going on. At this time, Nadia stood beside him and trembled with fear. Now, it was real primal terror. It was probably the mention of her father that had shocked her. The girl stopped and could not say a word of the former confidence was gone. Then, in the same friendly voice, she asked, "What did he just say?" It was evident that the girl was now ready to burst into tears out of fear. However, Han was relentless. He came even closer to her so that you could hear her heartbeat, and I told her that she had something to tell her father. The girl stared at him with eyes wide open, so wide that she was afraid. He moved closer to her ear, so close that she could hear his steady breathing. The guy began to speak. He moved past our experience. He told her something that made her heart beat even faster. The girl would die of fear now. Sergei stood nearby, watching as Nadia was literally ready to fall through the ground in fear. Kim stood close to her and whispered something in her ear. Her eyes widened even more as she heard him. Finally, the boy paused for a moment and asked, "Did she understand?" The girl froze in place, unable to say a word. Even to move was a feat for her. Her pupils narrowed and she could do nothing. Then Han turned to Sergei as if nothing had happened and smiled radiantly, apologized, and said he had to go. Then the guy headed for the exit. He changed his mood surprisingly cleverly. You couldn't tell that he had just spoken as if he were a maniac. Sergei looked at him with a surprised look. It was as if he had come out of a trance. Han Song's mood seemed to be transmitted to him, and he couldn't move, and said goodbye to him. This guy was weird, after all. And then Sergei looked back to where Nadia was standing. The boy had a frightened face too, though he hadn't heard anything, but he realized that this guy seemed to be quite dangerous. Nadia was trembling with fear. Her legs were shaking. She was unrecognizable. Her eyes were staring down at the floor, and her gaze was expressionless. Han was on his way out of the gym when he suddenly heard a light knock. The girl fell to her knees and kept trembling. She looked like she was about to cry. That bastard, I think he'd overdone it. The girl was still staring dumbly. She couldn't get her thoughts together. Most likely what the guy had told her had shaken her awareness so much that she felt completely exhausted. She felt like she'd just been interrogated. A vague silhouette stood by the door watching them. The stranger heard everything, but he didn't seem to be here. Having heard all that was needed, the man stealthily skulked off into the depths of the corridor. Now he would leave the two of them alone. The man put his hands in his pockets and walked quickly and at a brisk gait to somewhere far away from here. He saw and heard everything he needed to see and hear, and what he saw spoke better than any words. Suddenly, a shadow slipped near him. The guy didn't even see it right away, however. He was also being followed. The shadow began to lengthen, and immediately an incomprehensible silhouette appeared in front of the boy and began to transform into familiar features. It was Sai Young. She had disheveled hair and a worried look on her face. The girl looked at the boy and asked in a concerned voice what he was doing here. She could tell she was worried about something too, or she'd been watching him all this time. It was probably the latter. Standing in front of him, she was determined. The one who was watching was none other than Han Buell, who stood in front of her and looked at her with a completely calm gaze, as if he wasn't surprised at all, although it was possible considering how this girl liked to watch the others. The boy sighed heavily. He didn't like being followed, but there was nothing he could do about it. He didn't dare to forbid her after all. This girl was a killer after all. He answered as evasively as possible and said he had some things to learn. The guy averted his eyes to the side. He tried to lie, but he was pretty bad at it. The girl asked again, something to find out? She had heard the falseness in the boy's voice, and now it seemed she wouldn't let it go. The guy realized that there was no point in hiding anything since it would be bad, and said that he needed to find out if this newcomer, where the Black Lands, was accurate. And they didn't say anything for a while. The tension between them began to rise, both of them realizing they were watching this newcomer, but at the same time, watching each other. Sion asked, and even if it was true, so what? And around her, ghost energy began to fly around her, which soon filled the entire space. This energy was making her feel sick. Belle looked at her with a frightened look. Yes, this girl really has a strong spirit. One should be careful with her, or else she might kill him. Even he with his stamina became a little scared. The girl reached for her small dagger as if preparing to attack, the tension between them growing stronger and stronger. One more second, just one more tipping point, and they would definitely start fighting each other. Suddenly, the guy either came to his senses or something else, but he suddenly changed his face. His expression became terrifying. He looked at the girl with eyes full of coldness. So she is too. Immediately, the energy around the girl dissipated, and she took on a normal appearance. However, she still looked at him with a kind of disdain. The girl frowned and began to stare at the boy's face. She realized she couldn't leave him like that, but now was not the time or place. Another moment must be chosen. The girl immediately vanished, as always leaving behind only a puddle of small shadow. A second more, and she was completely out of sight. The boy was left standing on the road, all alone and bewildered. The shadow quickly scurried away, and in 1 second, I was moving as far away from him as possible. He was still standing there, watching the girl walk away with his eyes. He realized that with such a strong spirit, the girl could easily recognize his intention. He didn't think she would stand up at a time like this. Not a good time at all. What was she doing? And her actions seemed strange. The guy shrugged and clenched his hand into a fist in his pocket. This is going to be harder than he thought. A lot harder, all right. Can't lose his grip. Soon night fell on the city. The moon came into the sky, and its bright crescent moon began to illuminate the neighborhood of the academy. The boy looked out the window and rested. Han went straight to his house. The day had been too stressful, and he needed to relax his mind. He collapsed on the couch and sighed heavily. He needed to rest and get his thoughts in order. He sank into his own thoughts. Even here, the guy couldn't feel normal. If Nadia relayed his words to Anton, that was still nothing. Only half the trouble. But if Anton some action, then his lies would be exposed. And then it will be very bad. It is necessary to think of at least a few next steps. He squeezed his eyes shut and began to think of ways to make this lie true. He couldn't be exposed so quickly, or it would come back to haunt him. Besides, it could be life-threatening. He raised himself in his seat and ordered his virtual assistant to open the block he had laid out in the real world a year ago. A mechanical voice was heard, and a picture appeared in front of him, with a videotape on it. It showed the main character himself, and his mother or sister. Now, he was showing their new apartment. It was his sister. She was kind of rude, but she was smart. The guy was pointing at the girl behind him. The girl must have heard him and looked in his direction. And then, slight shrieks and blows were heard. The guy was screaming that the audience had just witnessed domestic violence. Han watched the whole thing and smiled. It brought back memories of his past life. He watched the following video footage of him coming on vacation with friends along the way. They argued and came up with a punishment for the loser. He'll have to have an Americano with 5 shots of espresso. And there was a loud, gleeful laugh. The boy sighed heavily and tried to take a sip, which he did with great difficulty. He no longer had the strength to watch this mayhem. And what is stupidity at this age? He put his hand to his face and tried to dissociate himself from his past. Okay, I had to pull myself together and think of something. It was only getting in the way of his concentration. The guy took his head in his palm and started slapping his cheeks. He'd been doing fine on his own before, so what was wrong now? Hansung thought about it because he basically started posting videos because he was getting lonely. Or maybe he wanted to get more attention. He began to dive into his thoughts, and the further he did it, the harder it got. It's so sad that he's the only one who remembers the real world. It seems like he's just now starting to realize something, because that's what happens. You only realize when you start to lose something. The doors opened with a slight creak, and the boy walked into a small cafe, small but cozy. There he was greeted by a saleswoman with a friendly smile. As soon as she saw the visitor, she immediately smiled broadly, welcomed him, and asked him what he would be ordering. The guy showed his 5 fingers and told me to get him an Americano with 5 shots of espresso. As soon as the woman heard that, she got a look of consternation on her face. Okay, she wrote down the order, Americano with 5 shots of espresso. In a minute, or even less, a small mug was on his desk. The order was ready. He looked at the coffee, which was unusually black for an Americano. He thanked the clerk and said goodbye. With unspeakable sadness, the guy looked at the small glass, the same Americano that had been his punishment. Something came to mind, so he decided to have a drink. That small, unassuming cup of coffee was stirring up memories of his real life, which he would most likely never get to again. He left the cafe and stood on the street for a few more minutes. The streetlights were starting to come on, and he was still standing there, holding a small hot cup of coffee. He didn't even notice that the cup was burning his hands. Hansung sat down on the stairs and began to think. There were thoughts in his head, many thoughts about his past life, about his friends and family, what he had done in the real world, and why had he come here in the first place. He took the cup and brought the hot coffee to his lips. As soon as he started to drink, his throat was not only burned by the hot drink, but it was also incredibly bitter. The guy even squeezed his eyes shut, but still he continued to drink. After taking a few small sips, the guy started coughing. 5 shots was too bitter. He grimaced and began to spit. The bitter taste, however, awoke in him memories of reality. He thought about it again and looked up. He wanted to look at the sky. He hoped that at least the sky here was the same as in real life. Otherwise, he'd just have to go crazy. It was at that moment that he didn't want to turn on the camera. He just wanted to be alone with himself. He looked up and saw a black, dark sky with stars flaring somewhere and a white moon in the middle. Suddenly, a figure appeared behind his back, slowly approaching him so quietly that he didn't even notice it. Immersed in his thoughts, he paid no attention to what was going on around him, and when a familiar female voice addressed him, the guy even twitched with surprise. He realized that there was only one person in the world who appeared so unexpectedly. Hansong shifted his eyes to the direction the voice came from. His gaze was slightly frightened, and he was waiting for whatever it was that was getting so close at this hour and catching people off guard. Some kind of maniac swarming around. But when he saw who was standing next to him, he exhaled. He saw a familiar girl. Exhaling, the guy said that she scared him too much. You can't sneak up on people from behind like that. You could have a heart attack. Song Si-yeon stood across from him and looked at the frightened guy with surprised eyes. So it's her. It's funny. Standing against the night sky, her hair literally blending in with the blackness. She looked at him in surprise and asked him why he was so frightened, like he'd seen a maniac. But that was partly true, but the guy didn't let me see it. He continued to breathe heavily. His fright had taken its toll, and he tried to calm down. He realized that this was just his old acquaintance. He looked at her with a slightly annoyed look and asked that she not move with the shadows. The girl ignored his request and looked at his cup. What's that he had there? Of course you're pretending not to hear it. That's just like her. The guy handed me a glass and offered me a taste. The girl was immediately embarrassed and thought, maybe we shouldn't drink after the who's who after all. She looked at him with a little disbelief, but she didn't agree. I didn't want to, or suddenly didn't want to. She brushed it off and said she didn't want to. The guy smiled and said that if she didn't want to, she could have her way. He went straight to his coffee. However, to everyone's surprise, the girl snatched the glass from him and immediately started drinking. It's strange somehow, as if she refused, but she behaves like a real impudent. As soon as the girl began to drink, she immediately felt an unbearable bitterness in her mouth, as if she was drinking water diluted with earth. The girl opened her eyes in surprise. She thought there would be something delicious. Immediately, she started to spit up. It tasted incredibly disgusting, as if she had really swallowed dirt. The girl didn't expect the guy to drink such filth. She handed him the cup back and, wiping her mouth with her hand, asked what it was. The guy calmly replied, as if nothing had happened, that it was an Americano with 5 shots. The girl looked at him with surprised eyes and wiped her mouth with her hand. He wondered to himself, she seemed to have such a temper, but she couldn't drink coffee? His gaze was literally mocking. The girl seemed to see it and asked him why he was staring at her like that. He was literally laughing as soon as the girl asked what was wrong. He said it was just funny to him to see how she couldn't just have a regular cup of coffee. The guy continued to smile. Naturally, the girl couldn't stand such insolence and immediately snatched the cup from the guy's hands. Give it to me. Of course, she didn't want to fall foul of some newcomer. Who the hell does he think he is? The guy just looked at the girl in fear. She kept holding the cup in her hands and yelling, "Here, I am growing up." That's not the point at all. It's just that it's his coffee, so she drank a little bit of it. The guy smashed his hands together and, through laughter, said that she could drink the whole thing. He didn't care. The girl stood in front of him and for some reason tried to justify herself. She looked at him with the same contemptuous look, still clutching the cup of coffee in her hands. She looked at the cup. She didn't want to drink it at all because she knew what it tasted like. However, there was no way out. We would have to drink. The girl tasted the glass and began to drink in large gulps. Her face showed how much she didn't like it, but she was so stubborn that to give up so easily was like death to her. In the end, she drank it all, and I think she even ate some of the brew, and the girl squirmed even more and said it was good, but she said it with force, because the coffee tasted disgusting. She couldn't seem weak in front of him. The guy smilingly praised her. Si-young returned his cup. Was she even like this? As it seemed like there was some kind of change with her, but it didn't fit in his mind, remembering from the experience from the game. This girl was completely different. The guy kept holding the cup and thinking. It all appeared very strange to him, the girl acting completely unnatural to her nature. Why did she become like this in the first place? It didn't look not that strange. It looked very strange. He kept staring at that unfortunate cup. She was being rude to the others, and in general, she looked like a killing machine that was better not to be approached at gunshot range. But now she was acting ridiculous and even cute. The guy drank the rest of his coffee and thought it must be some kind of game bug or a bug, but things can't change that much. The girl just wasn't like herself. She's acting like a child. You can't have everything change so drastically so quickly. He took a few big gulps of the rest of the coffee and sighed heavily, asking why she had come here. The girl continued to stand beside him, and all this time she hadn't said a word. It looked strange, to say the least. Hearing this question, it immediately embarrassed. She started looking for a normal answer. She started looking for a normal answer. She started looking for a normal answer, but all sorts of nonsense came into her head. The girl embarrassed. I think she even blushed for a second. It was the first time in her life that she had ever been embarrassed in front of someone. She wanted to say something that was probably important to her, but she averted her eyes, and it was obvious that she was very embarrassed. But finally, she managed to control her emotions and said that she had come here about her undiscovered skill. Her voice changed back to the same haughty tone. Hansong looked at her with a tired look. This was starting to get to him a bit. He had told her straight up that he would help her when they went to the dungeon. After all, it was as if the girl had woken up and clocked the back of her head and said she had completely forgotten. No, but that's not like her at all anymore. For a second, there was silence between them. After a short pause, the guy asked, "Did she have anything else to say?" And then fell silent. The girl continued to be silent, as if picking up the words. She started muttering something to herself. It was very hard for her to find the right words. Apparently, she was very shy, though that only made it worse. She didn't look like herself. What the hell was wrong with her? Looks like someone's in love. Suddenly, however, she seemed to come to her senses and blurted out the first thing that came to mind. Her cheeks turned red for some reason. She asked, "If he gets bored, doesn't he want to try an assassin's mission? There's just an easy target not far away." She said it with such enthusiasm, as if she was inviting him to a movie. He looked at her with a frightened or surprised look. Was she really? He didn't even find something to say in response. The sentence surprised and discouraged him so much that he swallowed his tongue for a second. Si-young stood beside him and waited for a response. The girl looked away. Is she crazy? Does she even know what common sense is? Apparently she doesn't. Suggesting a guy you barely know go on a murder spree together, well, that sounds a little dangerous at the very least. Hansong tried to deal with his inner resentment. He averted his eyes to the side. Goosebumps ran down his back, and he felt a bit awkward and even creepy to be around her. At that time, the girl started talking. Taken away. So she doesn't want it. You can basically pick a bigger target. She spoke of it with such ease, as if it meant nothing to her. The guy was even more confused. He was shaking even more. He was already silent about ordinary killing. Realizing the boundaries between the game and reality changed his thinking, and completely. He continued to stare silently in front of him, trying to control his thoughts, while the girl looked at him and waited for an answer. It was obvious that she was terribly shy, and she was very much interested in this answer. She suddenly remembered talking to Han Buell recently, his gaze spreading an ominous aura. He might not be right now, but he definitely intends to kill this newcomer. The girl closed her eyes, and she felt uncomfortable for a moment. She held up her hand and shivered a little. She couldn't let this happen. No way. It was worth learning more about the murder and being ready for anything. The girl tried to control her thoughts. She looked off into the distance and mentally said that the newcomer shouldn't die at his hands because someone else should kill him. She meant herself, of course. The girl tried to come to her senses after thinking like that. It was even a little hard for her to be honest. Yeah, she did it again. It's a pretty interesting activity. She said it with such ease, as if she were talking about hiking in the mountains, for example, or riding a bike. But no, she was talking about murder. It's not just like that. Yeah, it's a computer game and all that, but still. Hansung gathered his thoughts and declined, saying he didn't have time for this. The girl seemed to be stunned. She kept shivering, and she didn't fully realize that she'd been rejected. Then she went into a rage again and started yelling at the guy. He's the one who promised her to unlock her potential, so she's going to teach him by killing him. How's he like that? The guy looked at her with some horror. The assertiveness of this girl was frightening. She looked at him with a stern gaze, so stern that his hair started to move. He wanted to be anywhere else but here and now. This girl wouldn't get off his back, and what did she want from him? She's going to kill him any chance she gets, right? And why would he want to be a part of it? The guy stared at her with an uncomprehending look. What was even going on here? Why was she acting like this? He looked at her and tried to convince himself that it was just some mistake, some game flaw or something. But no, it couldn't be. He looked up at the girl from below as he sat on the steps. She blushed slightly. Insists on killing, wants to do his favorite thing together? Wow, the guy seems to have fallen into a trap, in a good way. He didn't have the courage to test her interest level, but it seemed this girl was asking him out on a date. The guy involuntarily covered his mouth with his hand. He felt even more creeped out. What was this? Why, all of a sudden? She wanted to kill him all the time, after all. Hansong sighed heavily. It was hard to refuse, especially when the girl was so insistent. But he was also afraid that if he refused, she would kill him, so who knew what she would think? All the same, the guy agreed. He already simply did not have the strength to refuse. As soon as the girl heard the consent, Yu immediately revived. She literally began to jump on the spot. She looked incredibly happy. She bent over to him, and with a smile in her eyes began to say, "Good decision. Killing is so much fun. They will practice and practice together." Her saying that made it even creepier. Killing is fun? It doesn't weigh shit. She was literally glowing with joy, and the guy didn't want to spoil the moment, and it could be dangerous for his life. He looked at the girl, who was literally glowing with joy, and he didn't want to spoil the moment. He looked up at the sky, and mentally asked God to give him the strength to endure the next few days. Sion remembered, "That's right. There should be an assassination order coming in a few days. We need to go together." The girl was just overflowing with enthusiasm. Han was trembling with fear. He really didn't want to get involved in this, especially so soon. However, the girl kept talking. When he tries it once, he will definitely change his mind. He was right to agree. Eating naturally is the right thing to do, otherwise she would just kill him. They continued to sit up at night and talk, or rather, only she talked. If it's hard at first, there's an easier task. Maybe he'll try it. The boy was shivering. He wanted to fall asleep and pretend he didn't know or remember anything. Magic comes from the components, or from the drawing of its diagram. Thus, the summoning, trap, borders, and other magic come together and become a dungeon. Most dungeons are a phenomenon of nature, gathered around pieces of spores. However, that doesn't mean there aren't man-made dungeons. There are some that are created by a person with a high enough level of magic to combine all these components into one, as it takes an incredibly large amount of time and takes a lot of effort. The teacher sat behind his chair and explained a new topic to the students. The teenagers, however, sat in their seats and looked directly at him. In the assignment to the top guilds, you can see the best modern artificial dungeons in existence. They are made of hundreds of circuits, but its only specialty was protection, so if the mages wanted to destroy the circuitry, they could easily disable it. Han sat back in his seat, not really listening. He'd known all this for a long time, since he'd studied the game backwards and forwards. The boy thought, he used to draw these schemes for YouTube. There is nothing interesting in this lecture. He already knew it all perfectly well. Besides, he could have easily read this lecture himself, as his knowledge was undeniable. Then, the teacher gave them an assignment. An exercise was drawn on the blackboard. You have found a small cave. While exploring a new territory, you need to survive here with an injured person for a whole week. You need to choose 5 spells that can last with a medium-grade magic stone, and you need to think of a suitable plan. That's where the guy perked up a bit. A practical exercise. It was fun to do, and even funny, but he doubted that any of the students would be able to do it exactly right. The guys began to solve the exercises, and immediately faced the first difficulties. Some of them, who were not particularly strong in magic, began to dumb and make mistakes. Others who were better at it began to help them. Han at this time was able to do it in just a few minutes without much difficulty. It wasn't difficult for him, as he had been doing it his entire conscious life. It was fun, and he was genuinely passionate about it. A sheet of paper with a drawn diagram lay in front of him, all ready to go. It was just a few minutes that flew by like a blink of an eye. He wanted to draw a more complicated diagram, but he was afraid that the others might not understand it. Charles, who was sitting next to him, looked at his diagram in surprise and opened her eyes in wonder. She had never seen anyone do such a task as quickly as this newcomer. Suddenly, the guy noticed that Sergei was also peeking at him. The guy was genuinely surprised. What, him too? Han thought that this guy was at least good at this. But no, his hopes turned out to be honest. Suddenly, something hard poked him in the back. The guy even flinched a little in surprise. Wanting to, he realized who had disturbed him. Han Sung turned around and saw that it was none other than Si Yeon, who was poking him with her dagger, which, thank God, was protected, and asking him to teach her how to do it. Why is she pointing a weapon at him? And teaching her in a lecture would be a little awkward. She didn't seem to care at all. He turned around and saw the teacher heading straight for him. The man was waving his arms and trying to explain something, but the guy didn't pay any attention to him at all. He was tired, and he sighed heavily. He was surrounded by only dumbasses, though why should he be surprised? They were only freshmen. The girl who was bothering him the most was the one who was bothering him the most. Well, there's nothing to be done. He's not some kind of an arrogant guy after all. We have to try to explain to them what's going on. He showed his diagram and started explaining it to everyone. It's very important to divide the magic stone according to the principle, if they set the pieces differently, they will join naturally. The other students began to pay attention to them as well, as their whispers could be heard throughout the classroom. Are they discussing the task together? Everyone wanted to know as well, but didn't this new kid become even uglier? He seems to have changed a bit. The main characters trust you. He got 5 popularity points. The minor characters are interested. He got 3 popularity points again. The guy looked at his characterization plate. Could he get more popularity points this way? It looked funny and weird, but if it worked, why didn't he take advantage of it after all? He started drawing another circuit to explain to the others how it works. One had to draw a simple circuit link with magic stone ink on top of that. They can slowly gather back magic. Another diagram was slowly forming on a piece of paper. The guy was enthusiastically explaining to the others how the principle of magic works. They just need to assemble them one by one with their internal ones. It will get another function if they change the composed parts a little. Another minute, and the diagram was ready. The guy drew it without any difficulty. It was a common thing for him, but the others looked at him surprised and scared at the same time. They certainly did not expect that the guy would have such a deep knowledge of magic. Suddenly, the magic circuit seemed to come to life, and out of it flew a small blue bird that looked literally like little pieces of sky. It flapped its wings and flew somewhere high. The sight was mesmerizing to say the least, especially for those students who were experiencing something like this for the first time. They lifted their heads up and began to watch the creation with rapt attention. Khan was incredibly pleased with himself. This scheme is oriented a bit differently, the main point of which is not functionality, but visuals. He is an old-school player for a reason. He was incredibly proud of himself. A sign immediately popped up in front of him. You have interested the instructor, you have interested the candidates. You get popularity points. Not particularly useful, but still a valuable acquisition. The bird sat on the girl's finger. She literally felt with all her limbs how soft and pleasant this bird was to the touch. Charles looked at the bird, and it immediately began to disintegrate into dust. The girl shrieked and didn't notice the bird had turned into nothing. Han reflected that it would be nice to have a skill that could support such magic. The girl was upset, apparently, and continued to stare at the finger on which a beautiful bird had been sitting just a moment ago. The boy thought, if he could combine this with his skills, he could create a magical life form. This dungeon hunt would be very important. For further advancement, thus he would be able to strengthen his position not only in society, but also in the community of mages. The day was coming to an end. Evening was already descending upon the land, covering everyone in bright red. Classes were over, and students began to run out of the academy grounds with joyful squeals. Before leaving for the dormitory, the guy decided to run to the gym to pump up his fencing skills a bit, and in general to improve his physical shape. As soon as he entered the gym, he saw Sergei. The guy waved happily at him. Sergei seemed to be practicing again. He spread his hands and said that he had been very upset yesterday that Han had left without saying a word. Nadia was standing next to him, and she seemed to be practicing too. Han Song walked over to her and looked down at the girl in the same way. He continued to maintain his image so as not to arouse suspicion. It wasn't like he could fall foul of himself. He would be at least very embarrassed then. He turned to the girl, and she looked at him and was frightened again. Stammering, she asked, "What is it?" The guy came even closer to her, and in the same quiet, curt voice, told her not to bother him and to get lost somewhere. "I think he's overreacting." Well, if the case calls for it, you can't back down. As soon as the girl heard that, her body shook. She felt the same nasty shiver she'd felt the last time she'd met this guy. She suddenly lost all her fervor and was no more than a scared little girl. Nadia tensed up again and started shaking. The guy thought he should act like this until she realized her abilities, right? He seemed to doubt his own actions. He looked at the girl again. She seemed to have told Anton everything, for even after all that had happened, she had something to say to him. The girl clutched her stick in her hands, but she didn't dare to do anything. Dark Earth Mountain is not a place where Anton can talk so easily, so everything should be fine for now. Han Song walked up to Sergei and took his hand. The guy invited him to come with him. Sergei immediately agreed, but still looked over his shoulder at the girl who continued to shake with fear. They got a little farther away and got ready for their boy. Sergei said in a cheerful voice that his opponent should be a little more careful, for he had advanced a great deal. Han smilingly said he was already shaking with fear. Well, now everyone was ready. Sergei prepared himself. He had been practicing all this time, and now he had improved his skills. It was impossible for him to lose at this moment. After all, he had been practicing his weapon skills for so long to make up for lost time. Sergei quickly pushed himself off the floor and rushed towards his opponent. He grouped himself, and now his technique was even more perfect. There was no way to lose just like that. Jin looked at everything that was happening, and was even a little scared. His eyes reflected surprise, fear, and some confusion. It seemed to be the first time he had ever been in this place. But somehow, it is even possible to throw away or not a sign. He is constantly practicing after all. The guy stood in front of the training room and did not know what to do. Before him spread out a huge expanse of action. Is this a training room? The guy stopped for a second and took a closer look. He felt a very strong mental force and also pressure. The guy even tensed up a bit himself. What was going on here? He still stood at the entrance to the hall, hesitant to enter. Who could be there? It was inconceivable. Not everyone could have that level of skill. He stepped a little closer and peered out from behind the door, and what he saw made all the difference. It all made sense now. Hong looked even more closely. There was a real battle. The guys were fighting among themselves, and not to the death. It was impossible to look away from such a sight. The guy was stunned, fascinated by what was happening. Sergei and Han clashed in a fight. They fought as if they were real professional swordsmen. There were loud blows of wooden sticks from each other, and now they fought almost on equal terms. The best swordsman candidate. Sergei can stand up to almost the entire world, and someone dared to challenge him? Hong stood at the entrance and watched it all with clenched fists. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Han Song fought using all of his techniques. He knew that he should not underestimate this opponent. After all, he was a skilled swordsman, and Han had a lot of experience, but physically, he was inferior to this man, so he would have to be careful. Jin looked at all of this with such astonishment, but why doesn't it affect him? He's fighting a champion after all, but how is that possible? They fought truly like professionals fully committed to their work, fast, precise, and deadly. He didn't know if the newcomer could stand up to his sword. However, one had to take into account that this man had much more experience than everyone here. The guy was standing nearby, watching. Comparing their skills, Han Song was smaller than him in size. It hadn't been long since he had picked up the sword. Jin gripped his fist even harder. He didn't know where this guy came from. He didn't know about his origins. He didn't know what he was doing here. However, this mystery, this unknowable feeling, made him want to fight. Suddenly, the guy felt his entire body begin to burn. He incredibly wanted to fight this man, to experience his power. It was simply an unexplainable feeling. He was incredibly eager to fight. If he lost, they would fight again, and until Jin won. He was so annoyed by this that he almost couldn't hold his temper anymore. Han Song swung his stick and prepared for another powerful strike to finally end the fight. The guy was concentrated. His movements were precise and graceful after all. He had years of experience in this game. Besides, he knew the weaknesses and strengths of all the characters. And then he dodged and hit Sergei's stick so hard that it broke again. Flying in different directions, Sergei barely managed to stay on his feet in order not to fall to the floor. There was a cracking sound, and the stick snapped in two with a crunch. One part of it broke off and skittered across the floor, making a loud clattering sound. Well, that's the end of that fight. Sergei stood there, and for a couple more seconds he couldn't understand anything, much less accept defeat. It was a real shock for him. How could he lose? He had practiced so much. It was simply unthinkable. However, there was no other doubt. He had lost. Sergei held onto his stick for a few more seconds and kept looking at it. and he lost, again. He said this with inexpressible regret, because he had been practicing all this time to get at least close to the level of his opponent. Han immediately ran up to him and said it was a great fight, really great. The guy was breathing hard. He really made a lot of progress. In his heart, however, he knew he was bluffing. They lived each other's weakness and fixed them. Now he had less and less chance of winning. The guy tried to hide his bluff, but it was getting worse and worse each time. Suddenly, someone called out to him. The boy turned his head there and looked to see who was approaching him. Suddenly, he heard stomping. Someone had swung over the fence in one fell swoop, and now he was coming toward him. The guy was running so fast that it seemed no one could keep up with him now. Hansong, as soon as he saw who was running towards him, it immediately bulged his eyes in surprise. What is he doing here? Why is he here? However, there was no stopping his acquaintance. The boy jumped over the fence and immediately ran toward him. He ran so fast that he looked like a maniac. An unbearable stomping sound spread everywhere. Jin jumped and landed on the ground with a loud rumble, so much so that everyone around even twitched in surprise. However, what was he doing here? Why is he even here? This was inexplicable after all. The energy literally radiated from this guy, and the heroic landing. It appeared that his body was engulfed in flames. For a second, Han was even a little afraid of such power. Jin looked at him with a pleading look, and begged for him to fight him. Such excitement glistened on his face that the boy was tired, even a little uncomfortable. He realized that this man was many times his strength. Hong kept begging for the guy to fight him immediately. He was literally glowing with enthusiasm. Han didn't know how to proceed. He stood there, even shaking a little with fear. There was no way to defeat this man in hand-to-hand combat, and even if he just hit him, there were doubts as to whether he would wake up afterward. Hong was so persistent that the boy was already beginning to fear him. He remembered very well how this boy had started beating him with his bare hands without any difficulty, but he could only hope that if they clashed in hand-to-hand combat, the boy would survive at all. Though no, there was no doubt about it. If he hit him as hard as he could, he would probably die. Jin clenched his hands into fists and prepared for the fight. He was so enthusiastic that he was like a rabid buffalo right now. And the guy made the only right decision to get away. And as fast as he could, he turned around and screamed, "I'm tired and I'm going home." He ran straight out of the gym. The boy looked at him in surprise. Han realized that he should stay away from this guy for a while if he wanted to stay alive. As the day drew to a close, Hansong literally flew out of the gym and headed for his house. He had to get some rest, or he would definitely fall off his feet. Soon, night had fallen. The lights were beginning to come on in the dormitory windows, the students had returned home and were now going about their business. And only in the student library there was some strange, vague silhouette walking around. It was wandering among the bookshelves, and as if it was searching for something. Everyone was already asleep. No one could catch him. The shadow came even closer, and paused for a second, as if listening to see if anyone was following it. But no, he was alone in this place. It wasn't hard to guess that it was Han with Shi Young. The girl was standing beside him and seemed to be shaking a little with fear. This place was depressing, especially at night. The guy looked at her with surprise. He didn't expect the girl to be nervous. She looked at him with a kind of disbelief. The guy asked, did she still not trust him? She thought it was weirder that they were here. They're still on the school campus, still here. Charlie raised her hand. This all seemed a little strange to her, too. The girl was incredibly afraid. She was already fearful, and now, being out here at night, she felt as uncomfortable as possible. She was trying to calm down, but she wasn't doing a very good job of it, to say the least. Library and dungeons are a logical combination, but this place. The guy looked at her with an expression of extreme dislike. Even she didn't trust him. He took a few confident steps forward and stood in front of the others. He was confident in his abilities. He'd brought them here for a reason, but he didn't seem to be able to win their trust. Now, all he has to do is show them something. Now, he would open the dungeon. The boy took a few confident steps forward and held out his hand. He began to take turns pushing the books on the shelves. At first, well, a book slowly gave way. Then he translated and did the same. Exactly the same suppleness drove back away. Suddenly, a handful of electrical pulses descended to the floor as if someone had plugged in an outlet. Immediately, the energy began to spread, filling almost the entire space. The boys were surprised, and only Han stood there as if he had expected it. The girls were a little frightened by this unexpected turn. In front of them, a hole began to appear, quite large, blue, and bright white in color. It seemed to be the passage to the dungeon. Si Yan thought. Her skepticism began to slowly recede. It's really here. The guy asked, should he cancel their contract? The girl shook her head negatively. She seemed to be overflowing with enthusiasm. She would have liked to go ahead already, however. The guy stopped her. We had to wait some more. There was one more thing they had to do before they went in. Before they entered this dungeon, there had to be at least some preparation. The guy opened his spreadsheet. They're using a special target awakening skill, the main character's skills for the fastest awakening. Quick thinking is selected. Acceleration. Awakening. It will continue to accelerate with constant training. Shion felt as if her body began to overflow with some strange energy. She didn't even have time to say anything, but suddenly this electric pulse passed through her entire body and then disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. Suddenly, she felt something strange that had never happened to her before. She looked at her tablet and fell silent. Then, the girl realized everything and clenched her fist. He had done it after all. She was incredibly pleased. The guy had kept his promise and seemed to have helped her unlock her skill. Next, it was Charlie's turn. The guy repeated the same action, and the girl clenched her eyes. It was a strange reaction, but was it really worth it? The guy's doubts closed in for a second. The girls stood and looked at each other. They felt strange. Charlie didn't even believe she had such hidden potential. They seemed to be satisfied. Yes, and the guy himself looked a little happy. He was pleased that the girls looked pleased after all. He'd done well for his first time. Now, they should have moved forward. He took another confident step toward the portal. Now, an unprecedented adventure awaits them. This was the first time they were going down into the dungeon, not just for training, but as a real mission. Come on! The boy, like a true gentleman, stepped forward. Bright blue color began to spill around him, and now they were already one step away from a strange and very promising dungeon. He stood in the middle of the circle and waited, only a few seconds left, before they would dive into the new dungeon. Now, there would be monsters waiting for them or something. It literally took a few seconds before they were inside. The guy came out first. It was a little damp and chilly inside, quite natural for a dungeon. Now the three of them were in a very real dungeon. The girls began to look around with some surprise. It was their first time here, after all, and only for Han was it akin to a normal walk. He immediately lit a small, glowing orb. This would serve as their lantern. It didn't consume much magical energy, but it still illuminated the path nicely. There was a reason he used this ability after all. A bright white light illuminated the path. There was only blackness and the unknown ahead. To be honest, the blackness and darkness of this dungeon was a bit frightening. However, the guy moved forward without any hesitation. They moved forward. The corridors were the same everywhere, and to top it off, there wasn't a very pleasant odor here, just like a normal dungeon. There was nothing to be surprised about, so they had to keep going and get to the end of the line. Shi-young looked around and seemed to have lost her mood. Is this a sewer? The guy replied that this place was built as a sewer, but it has become a great hiding place for monsters. There are enough of them to make it fun. Then, he ordered her to hide in the shadows and attack when the opportunity presented itself, and let Charles contain the monsters with his lightning. The girls nodded in response, and he will take on the most responsible mission. The boy stood still for a second, as if to endure a rhetorical pause. Suddenly, he waved his hand, and several drones appeared near him. They immediately buzzed, and their buzzing spread throughout the entire dungeon. Every corner seemed to hear them. How can you do that? What kind of conspiracy? The guy waved his arms and directed the drones into the darkness of the dungeon. Halen, the long passageway in the back. Have her show all the corners. The drones immediately rushed into the darkness, emitting a loud buzzing sound that spread almost everywhere. The guy stood in some heroic pose, or not. It was more like a ballerina's pose. He had his arms spread out, and he was staring down the pitch-black tunnel. What's this unnecessary pathos, and what's this all about? Who is he here in the dungeon trying to impress? The girls looked at him from the back. Charlie was simply delighted. Ji-young, on the other hand, didn't seem to share his enthusiasm. The girl looked at him like he was an idiot. It's just a wonderful instrument. The guy didn't seem to pay any attention to them. The name would be the Academy's secret room, or maybe secret dungeon exploration. Also good. He seemed to get too engrossed and stopped paying attention to anything at all. The girls started to look at him. They felt some embarrassment for their companion. He was acting like a child who got an expensive toy for the first time. What kind of behavior is this? Is this really how students behave? In a surprised voice, Charlie asked, "But is it okay to do that? Publish information about a secret dungeon on YouTube?" The guy just waved his hand in response. Who cares who's going to care about it? Besides, they'll take it all for themselves anyway. He seemed to be over-enthusiastic, which was natural. It was his venture. Now they would just have to do it right. Si-young didn't seem to share his enthusiasm at all. That's if they can do it. The guy immediately opened his tablet. You've bypassed the defenses and entered the hidden dungeons. Parashell Sanctuary, rank D. The strength of the incoming candidate is staggering. The position of the protagonist has been confirmed. Increasing the rank of the hidden dungeon. Activation of an urgent quest, Sanctuary, became the refuge of the awakened one. Rank T's, activation of strange luck. Activation of a new reward level increases with the difficulty of the dungeon. Well, it's a bit of a surprise, so set up that no one got through with half a kick. From now on, needing to be on guard as best as possible, the girls looked at him with surprise. Looks like the difficulty of the dungeon had increased by 1 level. Now, the monster had also become stronger. Well, they had signed up for this themselves. Suddenly, from the blackness of the tunnel came a growling sound, and it seemed that someone was looking at them. Charles trembled. The girl was scared for her life. She was afraid for her life, as it was the first time they were in such a dungeon. But what should they do now? A strange scream came from the dungeon. It was literally deafening, and now it seemed the boys were in terrible and dangerous danger. The monster was apparently quite strong, and now they had to fight it. The guy told everyone to get ready. They were about to face a very interesting challenge. He took up his sword and got ready. They're coming. The guy pulled out his sword and thrust it straight forward into the darkness. He was ready to face anything and anyone. This was going to be their final test, with not only the treasure at stake, but their own lives too. They were D-rank ghosts, flying at them with great speed, right now. From afar, they looked like some rags that had just learned to fly. However, don't be fooled. These things were much more dangerous than they looked. Suddenly, the guy used his Soundwave spell, however, Ghost immediately blocked it. What the hell? Soundwave doesn't work? The guy was surprised, and even a little scared, so how would they fight these ghosts? He still had his hand at the ready. He had his sword out, so that he could rush to attack at any moment. He cast an introductory spell, and the water was near the ghost. What a good time. Now, we can destroy it. He ordered Charlie to use her spell immediately. The girl prepared herself, and a lightning bolt appeared in her hands, or rather a whole ball of lightning that was ready to burst straight to the target. Khan immediately released a jet of water that went straight into the ghosts. The water had miraculously learned to fly, and it flew straight ahead. The girl immediately used her electricity spell, and a bundle of electricity immediately flew straight into the water. Water and electricity are the perfect tandem. They clash, and together they create a killer force. The girl continued to use her spell for as long as she needed to, even though it was quite difficult. Lightning wasn't her magic attribute, it was her skill. The ghosts wouldn't be able to fight her back now. It would be a matter of little else. Han ordered Si-yeon to attack. The girl immediately understood and rushed to attack directly at the ghosts. She swung her sword and approached them swiftly fast. When the ghost gets close, they will stop attacking from long range. He ordered Charlie to strike once more with lightning. The boy was ready to rush into the attack at any moment. The girl nodded her head and tensed even more. More electric sparks flew from her hands. They charged the weapon. The guy's sword glowed. From the electricity, it was infused with energy, and now his attack seemed to have been strengthened. The girl's blade also began to shine. If she could hit someone with this blade, her victim wouldn't survive. That was certain. The guys ran forward. They waved their weapons, and the distance between them and the ghosts was rapidly shrinking. They were like electric ghosts that were coming closer and closer. The ghosts were flying right at them. The guys swung their guns and aimed electric waves at the ghosts. If they collided with them, the ghosts would definitely not be left alive. As it happened, the electric waves reached their target and tore the ghosts to shreds. However, it seems there was more to it than that. They had an advantage when they shortened the distance between the monsters. However, they couldn't relax. The boy turned his head in different directions and looked for another ghost. This couldn't end that easily. He shouted to the others not to relax, for another ghost remained at large. Another ghost! Leave only one alive! The guy looked at them and shouted with all his might, his voice spreading throughout the dungeon. The girls looked at him in surprise. Why leave ghosts alive? Shi Young looked at him in disbelief. She still didn't understand. How was he going to get the treasure? The girl apparently didn't fully trust him yet. Charles looked at him in surprise. Her eyes widened even more. The girl didn't expect him to order them to let the ghost live. What could it mean? The ghosts were getting bigger and bigger. There was already a whole army of them. They were approaching the guys with ghastly sounds. They were quite creepy to look at, resembling executioners' hoods, which forward with their bright blue eyes. The girls prepared to strike again, but in this environment, only one had to be left alive, and keep him alive. The guy kept turning his head in different directions. They had an advantage. Once they were able to shorten the distance between the monsters, now need not miss the right moment to deal with the rest of the points. The boy screamed again, "One ghost! Leave only one alive!" He was completely focused on the fight and in control of everything going on around him. Charlie continued to conjure. Lightning bolts burst out of her hands. The girl was directed. Right there in the thick of the ghosts, she tried her best to apply the spell. However, her strength was almost running out. Hearing her comrade's order, she stopped and looked at him with surprised eyes. But why would they leave one ghost alive? Her eyes widened in surprise. The guy moved forward and said he had something to do. He held his sword in his hands and cut the distance between the ghosts as fast as he could. Si-yeon stopped and held tightly onto her blade. Knowing their number, he's still making up extraneous matters. The girl was a bit annoyed. What kind of childishness is this? She swung her charged blade, and in one fell swoop, she cut down one of the ghosts. No more flying around in the clouds. It's time to fight. What the hell is he doing? The girl was ready to tear him apart with anger. Han continued to fight. He chopped down another ghost. The guy was really tired. These ghosts were too many, even though they were relatively weak, but dealing with them was still a challenge. Of course, the guy realized this as he swung again and chopped another ghost to pieces. It wasn't hard to fight them when they were outnumbered. He himself had no trouble chopping them in half, leaving only small scraps of them. By the way, they did look a lot like rags.